There's a moment that every soldier knows, every veteran, every survivor of something that should have killed them. A moment when the brain stops processing sound, not because the world has gone quiet, but because the mind simply refuses to absorb any more of it. The artillery has been falling for 6 days without pause. 6 days of shells the size of buildings, turning the ground into ash and glass. 6 days of screaming, human screaming, and something else underneath it, something that does not belong to any creature with a name in the human tongue. 6 days of watching people you have served beside for a decade simply vanish, not die, not fall, just vanish, like they were never there at all. And then on the 7th day, the guns go quiet, and in that silence you hear something groan, something ancient, something so massive that the sound of it reaches you not through your ears, but through your chest, through the ground beneath your boots, through the fillings in your teeth. You look up, and you see your world tearing itself apart above you. You see the sky splitting open like a wound. You see the planet itself beginning to come apart at the seams. And you understand, with a cold and absolute clarity that no amount of faith or training or commissar speeches could ever have prepared you for, that everything your civilization told you was impossible is happening right now, right in front of your eyes, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. You see Cadia falling. My name is Sergeant Aldrich Vane, 8th Cadian Shock Troops, 41 years old at the time of the 13th Black Crusade, 23 years of service. For campaign, 6 citations, 2 wounds that should have ended my career, and one that nearly ended my life. I have fought orcs on the moons of Thandros. I have fought Tau on the borders of the Damocles Gulf. I have fought Tyranids on a world whose name was erased from Imperial records after the battle, because what happened there was considered too demoralizing for the public record. And I have fought the servants of chaos in a dozen war zones across the Segmentum Obscurus, which means I have seen the worst that the ruinous powers can throw at a human being, and I am still standing. I was still standing when Cadia fell. I am still standing now, and I am going to tell you everything. Not the version the propagandists put in the official records, not the sanitized account the administratum distributes to shore up public morale, not the heroic narrative the ecclesiarchy uses in its sermons about martyrs and sacrifice and the glorious dead. I am going to tell you the real story, the story of how the most heavily defended world in the entire Imperium of man was destroyed, the story of what it cost, the story of what it means, and the story, the part that nobody tells, the part that people like me carry around in our chests like a piece of shrapnel that the surgeons decided was too deep to remove, the story of what came after. Because Cadia falling is one story, a terrible one, a story worth knowing in full. But what Cadia's death unleashed on this galaxy, what it changed permanently and irreversibly about the nature of reality itself, that is a different story entirely, a bigger one. And I would argue, in my more philosophical moments, a more important one. So sit down, get comfortable, because we are going to be here for a while. I am going to take you back to the beginning, not the beginning of the 13th Black Crusade, though we will get there soon enough. I am going to take you back much further than that, back to the very foundations of everything that made Cadia what it was, and everything that made the forces arrayed against it so terrifyingly powerful. Because you cannot understand the story of Cadia's fall without understanding what Cadia stood against. And you cannot understand what it stood against without understanding the Eye of Terror. And you cannot understand the Eye of Terror without going back 30,000 years, to a time before humanity had even learned to reach the stars, to a catastrophe so immense and so total that its aftershocks are still being felt in the present day. I am going to take you back to the fall of the Eldar, and then we're going to work our way forward, step by terrible step, through 10,000 years of war, 10,000 years of crusades and defeats and Pyrrhic victories and near-extinction events, until we arrive at the moment when I stood on the surface of Cadia and watched the sky break open and heard a world scream. Hold on tight. This is going to be one hell of a ride. Part 1. The Wound in Reality. What is the Eye of Terror? I mean, really, what is it? If you ask most people in the Imperium, most civilians, most low-ranking soldiers, most hab workers and farmers and factory laborers. They will tell you it is a bad place, a cursed region of space, a place where chaos reigns and demons walk freely, and reality does not behave the way it is supposed to. They will tell you to stay away from it, which is good advice. They will tell you it is the home of the enemies of mankind, which is partially true. They might even tell you, if they have had enough to drink and are feeling philosophical, that it is where the galaxy is bleeding, which is more accurate than most people realize. But none of that tells you what it actually is. Not really. Not in a way that does justice to the sheer, incomprehensible scale of the thing. To understand the Eye of Terror, you need to understand the warp. The warp, also known as the Imperium, the Sea of Souls, the Realm of Chaos, the Great Ocean, is a parallel dimension that exists alongside and interpenetrating the physical universe. Every dimension of reality that you can see and touch and measure has a counterpart in the warp. But unlike the physical universe, which operates according to consistent physical laws, the warp is a dimension shaped entirely by emotion and consciousness. It is, in the most literal possible sense, a dimension made of feeling. Every thought you have ever had, every emotion you have ever experienced, every dream and nightmare and hope and fear that has ever passed through a conscious mind anywhere in the galaxy, all of that bleeds through into the warp constantly, like water seeping through a cracked dam. And in the warp, that psychic energy takes on forms, shapes, personalities, powers. The warp is what gives psychers their power. It is what makes faster-than-light travel possible, because a ship that enters the warp can cover distances that would take millions of years at sublight speed in a matter of weeks or months. It is a medium through which the Emperor's Astronomican beacon shines, guiding Imperial ships safely through the void. The warp is, in many ways, the single most important thing in the galaxy, because without it, the Imperium of man could not function. There would be no communication between worlds, no supply lines, no reinforcements, no empire, just isolated pockets of humanity slowly dying alone in the dark. But the warp is also the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, because the entities that live there, the things that have coalesced out of billions of years of accumulated psychic energy from millions of sentient species across the galaxy, are not friendly. They are not neutral. They are not indifferent. The entities of the warp, the things that humans call demons, are the living embodiments of the darkest and most powerful emotions in the universe. Fear, rage, excess, despair, corruption, slaughter. These things have been feeding on the psychic output of sentient life since before humanity existed, growing more powerful with each passing millennium, developing personalities and agendas and ambitions of their own. And the four most powerful of these entities, the four great chaos gods, Khorne and Tsench and Nurgle and Slaanesh, are so immense, so ancient, so impossibly powerful that they have carved out entire kingdoms within the warp itself. Vast realms of pure, demonic reality, each one a reflection of their patron god's nature. The brass citadel of Khorne, where rivers of blood flow eternally and skulls are currency. The impossible fortress of Tsench, a structure that is constantly changing, never the same from one moment to the next, staffed by sorcerers and plotters and scheming creatures of pure change. The Garden of Nurgle, a diseased paradise of rot and decay and twisted, horrifying life that the god of plague considers beautiful. And Slaanesh's Palace of Pleasure, a structure of impossible beauty and incomprehensible sensation, the ultimate destination of souls consumed by excess. These are not metaphors. These are not religious stories. In the Warhammer universe, these places are real. These gods are real, and they are hungry in ways that no human language has words adequate to describe. Now, the warp and the physical universe normally exist in a kind of balance. They interpenetrate. They influence each other. But there is a barrier between them, a membrane of reality that keeps the physical universe from being swallowed by the warp. This barrier is not impenetrable. It can be weakened. It can be torn. great concentrations of psychic energy, particularly negative psychic energy, fear, violence, suffering, death on a massive scale, can create tears in the barrier, points where the warp bleeds through into reality. These are called warp rifts. They are dangerous in proportion to their size, and even small ones can wreak havoc on surrounding systems. The stars near a warp rift begin to behave strangely. Time becomes unreliable. Demons can cross over. Reality gets soft and wrong and horrible. Now imagine a warp rift not the size of a room or a city or a continent or a planet or a solar system. Imagine a warp rift the size of a subsector of the galaxy. Millions of cubic light years. A region of space so thoroughly consumed by the warp that the barrier has not just been torn, it has been annihilated, dissolved. The warp and reality have merged in that zone completely and permanently. And what exists there now is not physical space, and it is not the warp, but some horrifying hybrid of both, a place where the laws of physics are optional and the will of the chaos gods is the only constant. That is the Eye of Terror. And here is the thing that makes it different from every other warp rift, every other cursed and dangerous region of space in the galaxy. The Eye of Terror was not a natural event. It was not caused by a collision of tectonic plates or a gravitational anomaly or a random fluctuation in the fabric of spacetime. It was caused by a civilization. Specifically, it was caused by the death of a civilization. The most powerful, most advanced, most psychically gifted civilization this galaxy has ever produced. A civilization that had ruled for 50,000 years and reached a level of mastery over both technology and psychic power that makes the Imperium of man look like Stone Age cave dwellers by comparison. The Eye of Terror was caused by the fall of the Eldar, and understanding that fall is the key to understanding everything that follows. Everything. The existence of Cadia, the rise of Abaddon, the 13 Black Crusades, the death of a planet. All of it flows like water from a single terrible source. From what happened to the Eldari 60 million years ago. No, wait, that is wrong. I always get the timescale confused. The Eldari evolved over a period of millions of years. Yes, they had their golden age of empire, the height of their power, when they dominated the galaxy and humans were still painting on cave walls. Roughly 60 to 80,000 years ago. Their fall happened somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15,000 years before the present day. The exact dates are debated by scholars and loremasters and confused veterans alike. So do not hold me to precise figures. What matters is the sequence of events, not the exact timestamp. The Eldari were extraordinary. I want you to really internalize that, because it matters. They were not just powerful. They were not just advanced. They were the product of millions of years of evolution, specifically optimized for psychic sensitivity and intellectual development. Every Eldari who ever lived was at least mildly psychic. Their greatest individuals, their seers, their farseers, their phoenix lords, were psychers of a magnitude that makes imperial sanctioned psychers look like children holding candles next to a supernova. Their technology was built around psychic principles. Their art was psychic. Their culture, their religion, their philosophy, their entire civilization was saturated with and shaped by their incredible connection to the warp. And they built an empire. Oh, what an empire it was. They colonized most of the galaxy. They built vast craft worlds, city-sized spacecraft the size of small moons, capable of traveling between star systems and sustaining entire populations indefinitely. They established networks of webway tunnels, stable passages through the warp that allowed instant travel between points in the galaxy without the risks of conventional warp travel. They created art and music and literature and philosophy of such extraordinary depth and beauty that even fragments recovered tens of thousands of years later leave human scholars weeping, unable to fully comprehend what they are looking at. And then they destroyed themselves, not through war with an outside enemy, not through a natural catastrophe, not through any force applied from without. They destroyed themselves from within through the slow corruption of their own desires, the gradual descent of their civilization into excess and hedonism and depravity on a scale that is difficult to describe without making the entire thing sound like a moral fable, which it also happens to be. You see, the Eldari lived extraordinarily long lives. centuries, millennia. Some of the eldest among them had memories stretching back thousands of years. And for beings with that much time available to them, the dangers of boredom and ennui and the constant search for new and more intense experiences were very real threats. The Eldari had solved most of their practical problems: war, disease, scarcity. These things were distant memories for them by the height of their empire. And so they turned, as beings with unlimited time and unlimited capability and unlimited psychic sensitivity tend to do, to pleasure, to sensation, to experience. And because they were psychically connected to the warp, and because the warp is shaped by motion and consciousness, everything they felt bled into it. Every excess, every debauchery, every act of cruelty performed in the name of sensation-seeking, every moral boundary crossed in the name of experience, every refinement of pleasure taken to its logical and then illogical extremes, all of it poured into the warp like a river of psychic pollution, accumulating there, growing, taking on mass and personality and hunger, feeding on itself, amplifying, spreading, attracting more psychic energy, growing more defined, more powerful, more aware. And then, after centuries or perhaps millennia of this process, of an entire interstellar civilization's worth of excess and sensation and cruelty and debauchery continuously pouring into the warp, the thing that had been growing there reached a critical mass. It was born, a new chaos god, the youngest of the four great powers, the god of excess, the god of sensation, the god of absolutely everything taken to its final, ultimate, most devastating extreme. Slaanesh. The birth of a chaos god is not like the birth of a star, which is enormous, but happens at a comfortable distance and over a time frame that allows for adjustment. The birth of a chaos god is an explosion of psychic energy that propagates through both the warp and real space simultaneously. It is a shock wave of consciousness erupting outward in every direction at once, and in the immediate vicinity of the Eldari civilization's densest population centers, the ancient homeworlds, the most populated sectors of their empire. That shock wave was catastrophic beyond all description. The barrier between the warp and reality did not just break in those regions. It was obliterated, vaporized, in the space of what was probably hours. Some accounts say minutes, some say days. But hours feels right. The entire core of the Eldari Empire was consumed. The homeworlds were swallowed. The population centers ceased to exist. Billions, perhaps trillions of Eldari souls were annihilated in an instant, their psychic essence consumed by the newborn god feeding it, making it stronger, making it more real, more permanent, more impossibly powerful. What was left of that consumed region of space is the Eye of Terror, a permanent scar on the galaxy, a wound that will never heal, because the thing that caused it is still there, still alive, still hungry, still growing. Slaanesh did not consume all the Eldari. Some survived in the outer regions of the Empire, on craft worlds that were far enough from the core to escape the initial shockwave, in the webway tunnels where the blast did not fully reach. These survivors, the craft world Eldari, the Harlequins, the Exodites who had chosen to leave the Empire centuries before its fall and live simple lives on distant worlds. These are the Eldar you encounter in the present day, a remnant, a ghost of what their civilization once was. Millions of survivors from a civilization that once numbered in the tens of trillions. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. The important thing, the thing that matters for our story, is what the Eye of Terror is and where it is. Because the Eye of Terror is not in some remote corner of the galaxy. It is in the galactic northwest in what is now the Segmentum Obscurus, relatively close in galactic terms, to one of the most strategically vital corridors in the entire Imperium. And just outside that eye, right at the edge of where reality begins to fray and the physical laws start to lose their coherence, there's a narrow stretch of space where travel and habitation are still possible. A choke point, a corridor, a place where the defenses of the Imperium, if properly positioned, could theoretically control all traffic in and out of the Eye of Terror. That choke point is where Cadia sits, or sat. Past tense now. The planet is gone. But it sat there for 10,000 years as the single most important strategic position in the Imperium of man, the plug in a dam, the cork in a bottle, the fortified gate between the roiling madness of the Eye of Terror and the inhabited worlds of the Imperium. Every army that has ever erupted out of the Eye, every Black Crusade, every demonic incursion, every Chaos war fleet looking to carve a path of destruction through human space, has had to deal with Cadia first, get past Cadia, and the road into the heart of the Imperium lies open. Be stopped at Cadia, and your invasion stalls, your supply lines are cut, your forces face defeat in detail. Cadia was the shield of the Imperium. And now I need to tell you about the sword that broke it. Part 2. The Warmaster of Chaos. His name is Ezekiel Abaddon, or it was once. That name belongs to the man he used to be, and the man he used to be died 10,000 years ago in the ruins of a palace on a world called Ullanor, during the greatest military triumph and the most catastrophic psychological collapse in the history of the Space Marine Legions. Before we get to Abaddon, I need to tell you about Horus, because you cannot understand Abaddon without understanding Horus, and you cannot understand Horus without understanding the Great Crusade. And the Great Crusade is where the Imperium of man truly begins, not as the half-dead, oppressive, stagnant, bureaucratic nightmare it has become in the 41st millennium, but as something that was, at its birth, genuinely magnificent, genuinely inspiring, genuinely the closest thing to hope that humanity has ever had. Let me take you to 30,000 years ago. The age of strife is ending. Humanity has spent the last 5,000 years tearing itself apart. Warp storms have cut worlds off from each other. Warlords have risen and fallen and risen again. Xenospecies have encroached on human territory. Mutants and psychers have proliferated, causing fear and violence and persecution. The dark age of technology, that golden era when humanity had reached across the stars and built wonders, is a distant memory. Humanity is fragmented, afraid and dying. And then a man appears. He is not entirely human. He is something more, something that has been growing and evolving in secret for millennia, carefully, one step at a time. A project of will and purpose and genetic engineering and psychic power, so vast and so long in development that calling a plan almost understates it. He is the Emperor of mankind, and he comes out of the shadows of old Earth with an army of enhanced warriors. The first Space Marines, the Thunder Warriors, and then the True Legions. And he begins to reunite humanity, world by world, system by system. He fights the warlords and the Xenos and the demon princes and the rogue psychers. And he wins. Consistently, brilliantly, ruthlessly, he wins. And then he finds his sons, the Primarchs, 20 godlike warriors, each one a being of superhuman capability, each one engineered from the Emperor's own genetic material, each one scattered across the galaxy by the machinations of the Chaos Gods, who feared what the Emperor was doing and tried to sabotage his project by hiding his greatest weapons from him. One by one, the Emperor finds them. One by one, these demigods are given their legions, thousands, then tens of thousands of Space Marines created from their genetic template, sharing their physical gifts, their instincts, their personalities. And one by one, these Primarchs lead their legions in the Great Crusade, the Emperor's grand project to reunite all of humanity under a single banner and bring Terra, old Earth, the birth world of the human species, back to its rightful place at the center of a resurgent human civilization. It is, by any measure, extraordinary. The Great Crusade spans 2 centuries and hundreds of thousands of worlds. Alien empires that have stood for millennia are smashed apart. Human populations that have been isolated and enslaved and oppressed for generations are liberated. Technologies are recovered. Wonders are rebuilt. For the first time in thousands of years, humanity is not just surviving. It is winning. It is growing. It is becoming, under the Emperor's guidance, something that might finally, after all the suffering and the terror and the darkness, deserve to call itself civilized. And at the center of all of it, at the right hand of the Emperor himself, is Horus Lupercal, the greatest of the Primarchs, the Warmaster, the being who the Emperor trusts above all others to carry his vision forward. Horus is everything a leader should be: brilliant, charismatic, tactically gifted beyond measure, personally courageous, beloved by his warriors and his brothers both. He is the most decorated military commander in human history. He is, in the genuine and non-ironic sense of the word, a hero. And the Chaos Gods destroy him, not through force. They tried force and failed. The Chaos Gods cannot simply reach out and crush the Emperor's champions. The Emperor is himself immensely powerful, a psychic being of incredible magnitude, and his protections extend to his sons in ways that make direct assault foolish. So instead, they do what Chaos does best. They lie. They manipulate. They whisper. They find the cracks in a man's soul, the doubts, the resentments, the secret fears, the unspoken grievances. And they widen those cracks patiently over years until the whole structure collapses. Horus has a grievance, a real one, not entirely imagined. He feels that the Emperor has begun to distance himself from the crusade, retreating to Terra to work on a project of enormous importance that he will not explain fully to anyone. He feels that his father does not trust him with the full truth. He feels used, a weapon, not a son, a tool, not a partner. These feelings are understandable. They are even, in certain ways, justified. The Emperor is not without fault in this story. He is brilliant, but not infallible. He is wise, but not perfect. He loves his sons, but he does not always show that love in ways they can receive. And so when the Chaos Gods arrange for Horus to receive a wound on a world called Davin, a wound that should kill him, that leaves him hovering between life and death, that gives the agents of chaos access to his mind in a vulnerable state, they find fertile soil already prepared for him. They show him lies disguised as truth. They show him visions of a future where the Emperor is worshipped as a god, where the Primarchs are forgotten, where everything the Crusade has built serves not humanity but the Emperor's personal ambition. They take his love and his loyalty and his genuine, deep care for his warriors and his brothers, and they corrupt it. They twist it. They turn it into something that looks like love from the inside but drives him toward destruction from the outside. Horus falls to chaos. And because he is the greatest, because he is the Warmaster, because his influence extends to every corner of the Crusade, half the legions fall with him. Brother turns against brother. The galaxy catches fire. The Horus heresy, the civil war that sunders the Imperium of man at the moment of its greatest triumph and leaves scars that have not healed 10,000 years later, begins. I am not going to narrate the full heresy here. That is a story, many stories, that deserve their own full telling. What I'm going to focus on is a single moment within it, a moment that is crucial for understanding everything that comes after. The Battle of Chthoniya. No. The Siege of Terra. No. Let me go even further forward. The moment after the Siege of Terra, after Horus is dead, killed at last by the Emperor himself, at a cost that shattered the Emperor's own body beyond any possibility of true recovery. In the hours and days and weeks following the greatest battle in human history, when the traitor forces are broken and fleeing and the surviving loyal Primarchs are trying to figure out what happens next, there's a young man, young by the standards of Astartes, a warrior only a few decades old, standing among the ruins of what was once the greatest military force in existence. His name is Ezekiel Abaddon. He is the first captain of the Luna Wolves, which became the sons of Horus, the legion of the Warmaster himself. He is the most feared warrior in the traitor forces, second only to Horus himself. He is a being of extraordinary martial power, a killer of legendary reputation, a warrior who has won battles that should have been impossible and survived wounds that should have been fatal. And his god is dead. Horus is dead. The dream is dead. The crusade that should have been theirs, the galaxy that was supposed to be remade in the Warmaster's image, the future where the chosen of chaos ruled all and the Emperor was pulled from his throne, it is all gone. In the span of a single battle, everything that Abaddon has believed in and fought for and sacrificed for has been annihilated. His god fell to the Emperor. And now Abaddon stands in the ruins of that dream, surrounded by the remnants of a broken army, looking at the future and seeing nothing but an abyss. He makes a decision in that moment. He will not stay to be slaughtered or captured. He will not surrender. He will not die here, on Terra, in the wreckage of everything he loved. He gathers what remains of the traitor forces, the warriors who have not been destroyed, who can still fight and march in board ships, and he leads them out into the Eye of Terror, into the only place in the galaxy where they might be safe from the vengeance of the victorious Imperium. And there in the Eye of Terror, on a demon world called the Planet of the Sorcerers, in the centuries that follow the heresy, Ezekiel Abaddon remakes himself. This is the part of his story that people do not always fully appreciate. Abaddon does not simply survive the death of Horus and spend 10,000 years sulking. He spends 10,000 years becoming something that makes Horus look like a warm-up act. And I mean that literally, not hyperbolically, because Abaddon does something that should be impossible. He rejects the patronage of all four chaos gods simultaneously, while still drawing on the power of all four. He refuses to serve any single one of them. He will not be Khorne's champion or Tsench's pawn or Nurgle's beloved or Slaanish's plaything. He will be the champion of chaos undivided. He will serve the warp itself, all of its power, all four of its greatest entities, as a single unified force directed by his will. And to demonstrate this, he leads 12 Black Crusades out of the Eye of Terror over the course of 10,000 years. 12, each one a massive military undertaking, each one a wave of destruction that crashes against the defenses of Cadia and the Segmentum Obscurus. Each one fought and bled for and eventually stopped at enormous cost by the forces of the Imperium. Each one a defeat, technically, in the sense that Abaddon does not achieve his ultimate objective of breaking through to Terra and destroying the Imperium permanently. But here is what the official histories do not tell you, or tell you only in footnotes and addenda and carefully worded understatements that obscure the horrifying reality. Each Black Crusade is not just an attack. Each one is a lesson, an experiment. Each one teaches Abaddon something new about the defenses of Cadia, about the response capabilities of the Imperium, about where the weaknesses lie and how they can be exploited. Each one gives his forces experience and confidence and the hardening that only real combat can provide. Each one bleeds the Imperium, not enough to collapse it, not enough to break it, but enough to weaken it, to exhaust it, to strip away its reserves and its confidence and its margin of safety. Each one brings him closer, and in 10,000 years, across 12 campaigns that span centuries and kill billions and reshape the military history of the galaxy, he has identified the single crucial weakness in Cadia's defenses, the thing that cannot be addressed by more guns or more troops or more orbital platforms or more space marine chapters, the fundamental vulnerability that all the fortifications and all the courage and all the imperial faith in the world cannot compensate for. The pylons. And now I need to explain what the pylons are, because they are the key to everything. They are the real secret of Cadia, the secret that the High Command does not broadcast, and the Ecclesiarchy does not preach about, and the Administratum does not put in its public records. Because to broadcast it would be to invite catastrophe. The pylons are the reason Cadia must be defended, the reason it cannot be abandoned, cannot be ceded, cannot be allowed to fall. The reason Abaddon's 12 previous Black Crusades have all, in the end, pulled back rather than pushed to the absolute limit. The Cadian pylons are ancient structures, pre-imperial, pre-human in fact. Nobody knows exactly who built them, though the leading theory among imperial scholars, and among certain chaos sorcerers who have studied them for the other side, is that they were built by the Necrons during the War in Heaven, that ancient conflict between the Old Ones and the Tan and the Necronter that predates all currently existing civilizations. They are made of a material that is not quite physical matter, that exists simultaneously in real space and the warp, and they do something that should be impossible. They suppress the warp. In the vicinity of the Cadian pylons, the boundary between real space and the warp is artificially reinforced, strengthened, made more stable than it would naturally be. The pylons are, in essence, a scar tissue system for the wound in reality that is the Eye of Terror, They are not healing it, they are not closing it, but they are keeping it from spreading. They are keeping the eye from expanding, from growing, from consuming more of the galaxy in its madness. If the pylons fall, the eye grows. If the eye grows, the warp floods into more of real space. If the warp floods into more of real space, demons walk freely in regions that were previously protected. If demons walk freely in those regions, the capacity of the Imperium to fight back collapses, and the whole thing cascades catastrophically toward an end that has a name in the warp. The Chaos Forces call it the Long Night, the end of all things, the final victory of the ruinous powers over the physical universe. Abaddon knows this. He has known it for 10,000 years. He has been building toward it patiently, step by terrible step. And by the time the 13th Black Crusade begins, by the time my story begins, he has everything he needs. The forces, the alliances, the weapons, the plan. And this time he is not going to pull back. This time, he is not coming to raid or probe or weaken. He is coming to end it. This time, Cadia will fall. Part 3. The Defenders. Before I get to the campaign itself, I want to tell you about the people I fought beside. Because this story, the story of a planet's death, is also the story of the people who stood on that planet and refused to leave. And those people deserve to be more than background characters in a cosmic drama. They deserve to be seen. Cadia was a world unlike any other in the Imperium. Its culture, its history, its entire social structure was shaped by the fact that it existed in the shadow of the Eye of Terror. Every generation of Cadians grew up knowing that the Eye was there, knowing that the things inside it hated them, knowing that those things had come for them before and would come again. This is not abstract knowledge, the kind of historical awareness that people on safe worlds have about ancient wars and distant threats. For Cadians, the Eye of Terror is the first thing you see when you look up at the sky at night, the eternal bruise on the horizon of existence. The reminder, always visible, always present, that the universe is hostile and evil is real, and the only thing standing between your family and absolute destruction is your willingness to pick up a weapon and fight. Cadian children are drilled in military basics before they can reliably read. By the age of 8 or 9, the average Cadian child can field strip and reassemble a lost gun in complete darkness, identify the silhouettes of common enemy vehicles by shape, and recite the basic tenets of Imperial Guard tactical doctrine. By their early teens, most are undergoing formal military training. By 17 or 18, the majority are serving in the Cadian Shock Troops, the most feared and respected of all the Astra Militarum regiments, the gold standard against which other Guard regiments are measured. There's a saying in the Imperium, Cadian by birth, warrior by nature. It is not just an empty platitude. It is a description of a culture that has, over 10,000 years, optimized itself completely and ruthlessly for the production of military excellence. Cadian soldiers are not just well-trained. They are bred for this. Generations of selective pressure, in a population that has been fighting constantly for 10 millennia, have produced a people who are physically tougher, psychologically more resilient, and militarily more capable than most of the rest of the human species. The kill or be killed nature of Cadian history has ensured that the people who survive to reproduce are disproportionately the ones who are best at surviving combat. I am Cadian. My mother was a veteran of 3 campaigns. My father died in the 12th Black Crusade when I was 3 years old. My grandmother served alongside Lord Castellan Ursarker Creed during operations I am not cleared to discuss. Military service is not something Cadians do. It is something we are. It is not a career choice. It is a birthright and an obligation, and for most of us, a genuine vocation. The thing we are built for, the thing we are good at, the thing that gives our lives meaning in a universe that is very determined to take those lives away from us. And we are not alone on Cadia. By the time the 13th Black Crusade begins, Cadia has become the most heavily militarized world in the Imperium of man, not just in terms of its own population and defenses, but as a staging ground and forward base for forces drawn from across the Segmentum Obscurus and beyond. There are Astra Militarum regiments from 100 different worlds. There are Adeptus Mechanicus forces with their strange rites and their incense and their mechadendrites and their absolute certainty that the machine god watches over them. There are Adeptus Sororitas, the sisters of battle, the warrior women of the Emperor's Church, whose faith is both their doctrine and their literal weapon, whose belief in the Emperor's divine protection can generate miracles that defy physics. There are Imperial Navy ships by the hundreds, from grand battle cruisers capable of glassing a continent to sleek fighters that thread through the chaos of a void battle like needles through fabric. And there are Space Marines, multiple chapters, the Black Templars, crusading warriors who have been fighting in this region for centuries, whose hatred of chaos is as close to a religious mania as anything I have ever seen in a fellow soldier. The Ultramarines, the gold standard of the Adeptus Astartes, disciplined and tactically brilliant and utterly unwilling to accept defeat. The Space Wolves, warriors of Fenris who fight with a ferocity that borders on the terrifying even by Space Marine standards. And others, dozens of other chapters with their own colors and their own traditions and their own ways of making the enemies of mankind regret their choices. And standing above all of them, coordinating this vast and fractious coalition of military forces, is Lord Castellan Ursarker E. Creed. Creed, just the name deserves a paragraph of its own. Ursarker Creed is, in the opinion of everyone who has ever served under him or studied his career, the finest military commander the Imperium of man has produced in the last 300 years. He is not a Primarch. He is not a Space Marine. He is not a Psyker or a transhuman warrior of any kind. He is a Cadian, a human being, a man of medium height and considerable girth who habitually carries a low stick between his teeth and speaks in a voice that sounds like it was carved out of gravel and discipline in equal measure. He has no supernatural gifts, no genetic enhancements, no divine powers. What he has is a mind that can process the three-dimensional geometry of a military situation at a speed and accuracy that most cogitators cannot match, and a personality so forceful and so absolutely certain of victory that it radiates outward and infects everyone around him with a confidence that they perhaps should not feel, given the objective circumstances. There are stories about Creed that have become legend in the Cadian military. The tank companies appearing from nowhere on flanks that were definitively confirmed as impassable. The infantry ambushes that materialized inside enemy positions that were supposed to be secure. The strategic reversals that happened so quickly and so completely that the enemy's after-action reports, when captured, read like accounts of supernatural intervention rather than military maneuvering. Creed's tactical genius is so pronounced, so beyond normal human capability, that soldiers in his command routinely speak of it in terms that border on the mystical. His aide-de-camp, a veteran Vox operator named Jaran Kell, who has served beside him for decades, once told a junior officer that serving under Creed was the closest to understanding miracles that a godless man could get. Creed knows what is coming. He has known in broad strokes for years. His intelligence networks are the finest in the segmentum. His analysts have tracked the movements within the Eye of Terror, the gathering of forces, the supply runs, the positioning. He knows that this time is different. He knows that Abaddon is not mounting another probing assault, another crusade designed to bleed the Imperium and retreat before the counterattack can organize. He knows that this time, the Warmaster of Chaos is coming with everything he has, and he intends to keep coming until either he is dead or Cadia is. Creed has been preparing, reinforcing, building, stockpiling, calling in every favor, every debt, every marker he has accumulated over 50 years of service at the highest levels of the Imperial military. He has been trying to convince the High Lords of Terra to commit more resources to Cadia's defense, and he has been largely ignored because the High Lords of Terra are the most self-important and least perceptive committee of individuals in the history of governance. And the idea that Cadia, the fortress world, the unbreakable world, the world that has held for 10,000 years, might actually fall is, to them, literally unthinkable. But Creed thinks about it. He thinks about it every day, and he prepares accordingly. And then the eye opens, and the 13th Black Crusade begins, And everything Creed has been dreading and preparing for simultaneously becomes real. Let me tell you what that looked like from the inside. Part 4. The first days. The initial assault does not begin with ground forces. It begins with the sky. The Chaos Fleet that emerges from the Eye of Terror is the largest single military force assembled since the Horus Heresy. Let me put some numbers to that so you understand the scale. The largest Imperial fleet engagement in recent memory, the Gothic War, fought against Abaddon's 12th Black Crusade, involved perhaps 300 to 400 vessels on each side at its largest engagement. The fleet that comes through the Eye for the 13th Crusade numbers in the thousands. Thousands of warships, from massive kilometer-long battleships down to destroyer escorts, from ancient vessels captured and corrupted 10,000 years ago to newly built monstrosities constructed in the demon-touched forges of the Eye. The Chaos Fleet is a darkness that blots out stars. It is so large that it generates its own warp signature. It is so large that the Astronomicon dims noticeably in systems closest to the invasion route. The Imperial Navy fights it. Of course they fight it. They have no choice. The void battle above and around Cadia is the largest space engagement since the Siege of Terra, and it is every bit as savage and chaotic and terrible as that suggests. Capital ships trading broadsides at close range, their hulls shredded, their crews dying in the depressurized darkness of smashed compartments, fighters screaming through the gaps between titans of the void, their pilots living and dying in spans of seconds. Torpedo spreads detonating against void shields with flashes bright enough to be seen from the planet's surface. Ships ramming each other when guns fail. Captains making the decision to overload their own plasma drives rather than be captured and corrupted and added to the enemy fleet. The void battle is immense and terrible, and nobody wins it cleanly. The Imperial Navy takes catastrophic losses, but they do not break. They fight with a courage and a discipline that as a ground soldier who has spent his career regarding the Navy as a convenient taxi service rather than a fighting force, will freely admit I had not fully appreciated before. They fight, and they bleed, and they thin the Chaos Fleet enough that when the ground assault begins, it is against a world that is battered and shocked, but still functional, still armed, still manned, still Emperor willing, capable of resistance. The ground assault, when it comes, arrives on a dozen fronts simultaneously. This is a signature of Abaddon's tactical thinking that has been documented across all 12 previous Black Crusades. He does not create a single point of pressure. He creates many. He forces the defender to spread resources, to make choices, to decide which front gets reinforced and which gets held with what is already there. He creates a dilemma machine, a military situation in which every decision the defending commander makes creates a new vulnerability somewhere else. And the only way to address that vulnerability creates another one. And so on until the whole defense is spread too thin everywhere and concentrated enough nowhere. Creed understands this. He has studied all 12 previous crusades in exhaustive detail. He has prepared for exactly this approach. But understanding a tactic and being immune to it are two very different things. And even Creed's extraordinary mind can only move forces so fast, can only anticipate so much, can only be in so many places at once. I am at the Croft garrison when the ground assault begins. In the context of Cadia's overall defensive layout, Croft is a secondary position important, but not one of the primary fortress nodes that Creed has concentrated his heaviest assets around. We have a regiment of our own Cadians, the 8th, which is mine, and another full regiment of Mordians. Those parade ground perfect soldiers from Mordian who march in lockstep even under artillery fire and die in ordered ranks rather than break formation. We have 2 companies of science. We have an armored squadron of Leman Russ battle tanks, 12 vehicles in total, which sound like a lot until you see what comes at us. The first thing I see, and this is the first actual engagement of the ground war for me, the first contact after 6 days of waiting and watching the void battle overhead, is not soldiers. It is a dust cloud. It fills the horizon from north to south as far as I can see, and it is moving toward us at the speed of a cavalry charge. And then the dust cloud resolves itself into shapes, and I understand what I am looking at. And I feel something that I have not felt in 23 years of combat. Not fear exactly. Fear is too small a word. This is something more fundamental. The instinct that every evolved creature has. The one that says, what you are looking at is bigger than you. Bigger than this. Bigger than all of this. The Chaos Warband that hits Croft Garrison first is spearheaded by heretic Astartes, Space Marines who fell to Chaos, former brothers of the legions who followed the traitor Primarchs into the Eye of Terror 10,000 years ago, and who have been living there since, corrupted and changed by millennia of proximity to the warp, their power armor fused to their bodies in places, their minds twisted into shapes that are barely recognizable as the warrior monks they once were. But their combat capability, that terrible, superhuman martial excellence that defines everything in Astartes, is completely intact, more than intact, enhanced by chaos gifts, sharpened by 10,000 years of constant warfare inside the Eye, driven by a hate that has been burning for 10 millennia and has lost none of its heat. There are perhaps 200 of them in the vanguard, 200 Chaos Space Marines, in corrupted power armor bearing the marks of 4 different Chaos patrons. Behind them, tens of thousands of regular infantry, human beings who have chosen chaos or been born into its service, or been driven to it by circumstance and desperation. Cultists and renegades and soldiers of warbands that have been raiding Imperial space for generations. And behind them, artillery, demon engines, monstrous constructs of metal and flesh and demonic possession that move wrong, that move like living things when they should be machines, that bleed when they should spark. Our guns open up at maximum range. The Leman Russes speak first, and their shells are beautiful and terrible, columns of fire and fragmented metal that tear through the advancing infantry like a scythe through wheat. The cultists die in hundreds. They keep coming. Our heavy bolters add their voices, and the Scions, with their hotshot lost guns, are picking Chaos Space Marines individually, trying to find the weak points in their corrupted plate. The Chaos Marines are slowing. Some of them are going down. Not enough. The first heretic Astartes to reach our line is a being that wears the marks of Khorne, the blood god, on his armor and in his name and in every aspect of the way he fights. He comes over the barricade like a wave of violence given physical form, and the 2 troopers he reaches first simply cease to be, as efficiently and completely as if they had never existed. I am 40 meters away when this happens, and I see it, and I make a decision that my training absolutely endorses, and every survival instinct I possess absolutely endorses, and that still in the smallest and most honest part of my mind takes every ounce of courage I have. I aim for the eye lenses of his helm, and I squeeze the trigger. My lost gun speaks twice. Both shots hit. The Chaos Marine staggers, turns toward me. Those corrupted lenses look at me with something behind them that is not human, and is not animal, and is not, in the most precise sense of the word, real. And then my sergeant, a woman named Elise Vero, who has been doing this job for 30 years, and has the patience of geology and the temperament of a thunderstorm, puts a crock grenade directly under his gorget, and he goes down. That is how the first day of the ground war begins for me. 1 man, 1 grenade, 1 Chaos Space Marine stumbling into the dirt of Cadia. And then the next one reaches the line, and the one after that, and the one after that, and we do not stop fighting until there is no light left in the sky, and the dead on both sides are too numerous to step around, and my hands are shaking so badly I cannot reload without concentrating on each individual movement as if I am learning to use them for the first time. We hold Croft Garrison that first day. We hold it the second day. On the third day, the demon engines arrive in earnest, and we stop holding and start surviving. Part 5. The nature of the enemy. I want to stop here and talk about the chaos forces in a way that I think is important and that most military narratives about the Black Crusades fail to do properly. Because there's a tendency, an understandable one, a tendency that the mini-storm actively encourages, to talk about the forces of chaos in purely abstract, demonological terms. The servants of the dark gods, the ruinous powers, the great enemy, all of these terms are accurate. None of them help you understand what you are actually fighting. Let me tell you what you are actually fighting. Some of the forces of chaos, the demons, the literally supernatural entities, are genuinely alien in nature. They are not human. They do not think like humans. They do not want things that humans want. A demon of Khorne wants blood and skulls, and the continuous enactment of violence, not because it is angry, not because it has grievances, but because that is its nature, as fundamental and non-negotiable as a rock's tendency to fall downward. A demon of Nurgle spreads disease and decay not out of malice, but out of love, a horrifying, pestilential love that wants to embrace all living things in its corruption because it genuinely, in its twisted way, believes it is offering them something valuable. You cannot negotiate with a demon. You cannot reason with it. You cannot appeal to its better nature because it does not have one in any sense that a human would recognize. But the majority of the forces you actually face in a Black Crusade are not demons. They are people. That is the part that is hardest to understand from the outside. Most of the soldiers who come through the Eye of Terror, the cultists, the renegades, the Chaos-based Marines who were once loyal servants of the Emperor, are people who made choices, or were born into situations, or were pushed past breaking points, and ended up on the wrong side of the ledger of cosmic good and evil. This does not make them sympathetic, not necessarily, not when you are trying to stop them from killing everyone around you. But it does make them comprehensible in a way that pure demonology does not. And comprehensible enemies are enemies you can think about clearly, which is a tactical necessity. The cultists, the ordinary human infantry of the Chaos forces, are, in my experience, a mixed collection of the desperate, the fanatical, and the deceived. Some of them genuinely believe in what they are fighting for. They have been told by chaos preachers and warlords and missionaries of the dark gods that the Imperium is the villain, that the Emperor is a dead tyrant whose corpse religion demands billions of sacrifices a year and delivers nothing in return but oppression and servitude and early death, that chaos offers freedom, power, sensation, transcendence. Some of them have been convinced of this sincerely, and they will fight and die for it with a fervor that equals anything the ecclesiarchy can produce in its most devoted faithful. Others are less ideological. They fight because they have always fought, because their fathers fought for chaos and their fathers before them, because the warlord who commands them is the only source of protection and food in the region they come from. And service is not a choice, but a survival mechanism, because they were conscripted and have no option, because they were captured and offered the choice between service and death. These soldiers are not fundamentally different from Imperial Guard troopers on some level. People who fight because circumstances demand it, and who have no good exit from the situation they are in. And the chaos-based Marines are something else again, something that makes my chest tight to think about even now, even after everything. They were ours. They were us. They were created by the Emperor. They were trained in the same traditions, drilled in the same doctrines, shaped by the same ideals of brotherhood and duty and sacrifice. They fell through betrayal, through corruption, through the psychic poison of 10,000 years in the eye. But the distance from what they were to what they are is shorter than people like to think. That is the uncomfortable truth about the traitor legions. They did not begin as monsters. They ended as monsters. And the journey from one to the other is a road that, under the right circumstances, any of us might have walked. I think about this sometimes. On the long nights in transit ships, when I cannot sleep, and the other veterans are snoring and the recycled air smells like nothing, I think about the first captain who led us all to ruin. And I wonder what he was like before, when he believed, when the dream was real, when he thought he was fighting for something worth fighting for. And then I stopped thinking about it, because that line of thinking does not help anyone. And I am still a soldier even if my world is gone. And soldiers need to be pointed at problems, not at questions. Back to Croft Garrison. Part 6. KRAF Garrison Falls. The demon engines change everything. I want to be precise about this because people who have not faced them do not fully understand how different they are from ordinary military hardware. A Leman Russ battle tank is a beautiful machine. I mean that without irony. It is a robust, reliable, versatile weapon system that has served the Imperium for 10,000 years and continues to do so because it works. It kills things. It is armored enough to survive most things. It is operable by ordinary soldiers without extensive, specialized training. It is, in the context of industrial warfare, an excellent piece of technology. A demon engine is something else entirely. Take a vehicle, any vehicle, a tank, a walker, a gun carriage, and build it in a forge where the boundary between real space and the warp is thin, where demonic entities can be bound into the metal during the construction process, where the machine is deliberately designed not just as a weapons platform, but as a vessel for demonic possession. The result is a thing that fights like a machine, but is alive, that regenerates damage because the demon animating it can knit metal back together the way flesh heals wounds, that can sense the psychic resonance of the soldiers fighting it and respond to their fear, their hatred, their determination. That screams, that bleeds, that when you destroy it, dies with a howl that does something to the air around it, something that takes trained soldiers and turns them briefly, terribly, into something less than soldiers. The first demon engine to hit Croft Garrison is a defiler, a massive construct on articulated legs, like a nightmare cross between a tank and a crab and something that has no name in the biological record. It is 50 feet tall at least. Its primary weapon is a battle cannon that it fires with the casual accuracy of something that has done this 10,000 times. It comes over our outer perimeter wall like it is not there. And the Leman Russes are beautiful, reliable, excellent Leman Russes. Hit it repeatedly and accurately, and shots slow down, but they do not stop it. And 2 of the tanks are destroyed before the third scores a lucky penetrating hit on the demon binding. And the defiler lets out a sound that makes every soldier within 100 meters cover their ears instinctively, even though the sound is not exactly auditory. It is in the chest and the teeth and the back of the eyes. And then it collapses. But by then, there are 3 more behind it. We fall back to the secondary positions. Vero is screaming coordinates into her Vox, calling for artillery support that may or may not still exist, calling for Science to pull back to the inner compound, calling for the armor to hold the eastern approach and buy us time. I am doing what sergeants do in situations like this, making sure the soldiers around me are doing what they should be doing, identifying the people who are about to break and getting in front of them, literally and figuratively, and being the thing they can look at and think he is still here. He is not run. It is survivable. That is 90% of what a sergeant does in combat. Not tactics, not heroics, just being present and functional in circumstances that argue strongly for the opposite. We hold the inner compound for 2 more days. On the 4th day of ground combat, the 10th overall day of the 13th Black Crusade, Vero takes a shell fragment through the chest. She is alive when I get to her. She is conscious and she is angry, which are both good signs. She tells me to stop making that face, which tells me the face I am making is the one I make when I am worried about something I'm not allowed to be worried about in front of subordinates. I tell her she looks terrible. She tells me she has seen worse. This is not strictly true, but it is the right thing to say. I call for a medic and I stay with her until one comes, and I tell her quietly that I need her to survive this because I am running short on people who know what they're doing. And she laughs, which makes her cough, which makes her angrier. And the medic arrives and drags her away, and I do not see her again for 3 weeks. By the end of the 4th day, Croft Garrison is no longer a garrison. It is rubble with soldiers in it. We have lost 60% of our initial strength. The Mordians are down to perhaps half. The armor is gone. All 12 Leman Russes destroyed or retreated, or one that simply drove away and was never explained to me satisfactorily. We are holding because Creed has managed to route a regiment of Armageddon Steel Legion through our position as reinforcement. And the Steel Legion are extraordinary soldiers in their own right, veterans of the Orc Wars who know how to fight in rubble because they have been doing it for decades. But we are not turning the tide. We are surviving. There is a difference, and I know which one I am in. Reports filter through the Vox. Other garrisons are doing better or worse. One of the primary fortress nodes, Cazapartix, one of the great fortress cities of Cadia, has been encircled. The Navy has lost another 3 capital ships. There is something happening to the north near the pylons that no one will talk about over the Vox, but that junior officers are whispering about with faces that make my stomach go cold. And then comes the news that changes everything. The Phalanx is coming. Part 7. The Phalanx and the Primarch. I need to step back from Croft Garrison for a moment and tell you about something that is happening simultaneously far from my little patch of rubble. That is going to change the entire course of the battle. The Phalanx is the chapter keep of the Imperial Fists, the fortress monastery of one of the oldest and most revered space marine chapters in existence. But it is not a ground structure. It is a ship, a station ship, technically, a vessel so enormous that calling it a warship is like calling a mountain a rock. The Phalanx is ancient, built during the Great Crusade, and it is quite literally the largest man-made structure in the Imperium of man. It makes other ships look like children's toys. It makes orbital stations look like sheds. And it is armed accordingly. The guns on the Phalanx have destroyed worlds. Not metaphorically, literally. Actual worlds, actual planets have been shot until they came apart by the weapons mounted on this ship. The Phalanx is coming to Cadia. But that is not the most important thing arriving. The most important thing arriving, the thing that is going to transform the battle in ways nobody on the Cadian surface is yet aware of, is being carried inside the Phalanx, specifically inside a specially constructed life support chamber deep in the vessel's core, surrounded by technology that exists nowhere else in the Imperium, maintained by tech priests who have devoted their lives to its upkeep, connected to systems of staggering complexity and power. The body of Robot Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines. Guilliman has been dead, or something very like dead, for 10,000 years. He fell to a poisoned blade wielded by Fulgrim, his corrupted brother, during the Horus Heresy, and the wound was such that death was only prevented by the intervention of technology that kept his body in a state of perpetual suspension, neither alive nor dead, frozen at the moment of his near death, preserved against the hope, the mad, desperate, 10,000-year hope that someone someday would find a way to save him, that someone as Belisarius Call, Archmagos of the Adeptus Mechanicus, an individual so old, so modified, so far beyond conventional human parameters that calling him a man is technically accurate and entirely insufficient. Call has been working on a project, a secret project, authorized by Guilliman himself 10,000 years ago before he fell, that has taken all of those 10,000 years to complete. He has the means to save Guilliman. He has the means to bring the Primarch back. But first, they have to get to Cadia. And getting to Cadia, with the 13th Black Crusade in full swing and the Chaos Fleet choking the approaches to the system, is not straightforward. The Phalanx fights its way in, the Ultramarines aboard adding their voices and their guns to the void battle already raging, taking losses but driving through, arriving above Cadia at the price of blood and hull plating in the lives of good warriors. They arrive in time to see Cadia starting to lose, because the battle, and I am condensing months of grinding, terrible, exhausting warfare here, is going badly for the Imperium. Not catastrophically, not yet. But the Chaos forces are too numerous, too aggressive, too relentlessly supplied from the Eye of Terror. And the Imperial forces, for all their courage and their considerable tactical skill, are not gaining ground. They are holding at terrible cost. But the equation is not in their favor, and everyone who can read a map and count can see it. Creed can see it better than anyone. And Creed makes a decision. I learn about this decision secondhand from officers who were in the command bunker when it was made. Because Creed is not the sort of commander who broadcasts his thinking to the rank and file. He is the sort who tells you what to do and trusts you to do it, and reserves his reasoning for people who need it for operational purposes. But the essence of it is this. Creed has identified a way to potentially end the crusade. Not just hold it off, end it, but it requires concentrating forces in a way that creates vulnerabilities elsewhere. It requires betting that certain positions can hold long enough. It requires, in short, the kind of calculated gamble that only a commander who is losing is ever forced to make. It requires activating all the pylons simultaneously. If the pylons can be activated, all of them across the entire planet simultaneously, the warp suppression effect they generate will be so massive and so sudden that it will cut the Chaos fleet off from the Eye of Terror. The demonic entities in the Chaos forces will be weakened or banished. The advantage that Abaddon's forces draw from their warp connection will be stripped away in an instant. It will not end the battle immediately. There are still physical soldiers and physical ships to deal with, but it will change the balance dramatically enough to turn a losing battle into one that might be won. The problem is that activating all the pylons requires getting people to all the pylons. And many of the pylons are behind enemy lines, in territory that is currently occupied by Chaos forces who are not going to stand aside and let Imperial soldiers walk up and press buttons. Creed begins planning the operation. And meanwhile, in the phalanx, Belisarius Cawl is doing something unprecedented in human history. He is waking a god. Part 8. The Return. You have to understand what it means for a Primarch to return. Not in the symbolic sense, not in terms of what it means for morale, for propaganda, for the psychological impact on both sides. I mean in the literal, physical sense of what a Primarch is and what their presence does. A Primarch is not a Space Marine. Space Marines are extraordinary. Transhuman warriors who have been modified at a genetic level to be stronger, faster, tougher, more capable in every measurable physical parameter than any unmodified human being. Space Marines are monsters of capability by normal standards. They can lift things that would crush ordinary humans. They can absorb damage that would kill anything else. They fight with a precision and a ferocity that makes professional soldiers look like amateurs. A Primarch makes Space Marines look like normal humans. The Primarchs are the Emperor's sons, created from his own genetic material, engineered to be the ultimate expression of human potential, shaped by the power and the will of the most powerful psychic entity the human species has ever produced. Each one is unique, a singular individual shaped by their nature and their genetics and the world they landed on when the Chaos Gods scattered them across the galaxy as infants. But all of them share the fundamental characteristic of being so far beyond human baseline capability that interacting with one, even for a hardened veteran, is a genuinely disorienting experience. Robert Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, is one of the greatest of them. Not the most martial, sanguineous, and the lion, and Russ might contest that honor, but arguably the most complete. He is a warrior of the very first order, capable of killing things that should require armies to kill. But beyond that, he is a statesman, an administrator, logistician, a philosopher of war and governance and law. He wrote the Codex Astartes, the foundational tactical and organizational document of the Space Marines, and it is still in use 10,000 years later. He built the Ultramar system into a civilization within a civilization, pocket empire that is, by most measures, the best governed human territory in the Imperium. He is not just a weapon. He is a mind. And that mind, after 10,000 years of frozen suspension, is coming back. The awakening is not gentle. It is not cinematic in the way that stories sometimes sanitize these things. It is painful. It is violent. It is a being whose body has been held at the threshold of death for 100 centuries, suddenly having all of that biological potential unlocked at once. And the sheer physical force of it is enough to crack the deck plating of the chamber it happens in. There is screaming involved, not from fear or weakness, but from the simple physical reality of going from suspended near death to full consciousness in a matter of hours. There is confusion. There is disorientation. There is a period of, to put it charitably, adjustment. And then there is clarity, by the accounts of those present, by the account of Cawl himself, who has written a record that I have read in fragments, because the full thing is classified at a level I cannot access. What comes through on the other side of that adjustment is not a man struggling to remember who he is. It is a being that knows exactly who he is, that has not forgotten a single detail of its previous existence, that is fully and completely and terrifyingly present in a way that makes the air in the room feel heavier. Guilliman looks at Cawl. He looks at the Ultramarines who are present, the finest warriors his chapter can produce, the ones who have been chosen to be here for this moment. He looks at the state of his armor, the ancient tactical plate that has been maintained for 10,000 years. And then he asks a question that is simple and devastating and perfect. He asks, what has happened to my father's Imperium? And nobody in that room knows how to answer, because the truth is so vast and so terrible and so far from anything that existed in his memory that summarizing it in a way that does justice to all of it is functionally impossible. But they try. And as they try, over hours and then days, as Guilliman absorbs the reality of 10,000 years of history, 10,000 years of slow degradation and desperate survival, and heroism and failure and compromise and horror. Something happens to his face that the observers describe differently depending on who you ask. Some say he looks angry. Some say he looks grief-stricken. Some say he looks determined. I think it is probably all three, cycling through in rapid succession. Because the Imperium he is looking at is not the dream he built it to be. It is something smaller and stranger and more broken, and in some ways more impressive, and in other ways more heartbreaking than anything he could have imagined. But it is still here. Humanity is still here. And that, apparently, is enough. He asks for his armor. He asks for a full military briefing. He asks about Cadia. And when he is told about the state of the battle, about Creed's plan, about the pylons, about the forces in play, he makes a decision so quickly and so completely that the officers briefing him are still processing his response by the time he is already moving toward the hangar bay. He is going to Cadia. He is going to fight. The Primarch has returned. Part 9. The Storm Breaks. I am going to be honest with you. I was not present for Guilliman's arrival on Cadia. I was deep inside Croft Garrison when the transport came down 6 kilometers from the nearest LZ, engaged in a firefight that had been going continuously for 47 hours at that point. I did not see the Primarch set foot on my planet for the first time. I did not witness the moment that, by all accounts, changed the psychological tenor of the entire battle. When 500 Ultramarines in their blue plate stepped out behind their Primarch, and the Chaos forces opposing the landing zone simply ran. Not retreated. Ran. Creatures of darkness and violence and 10,000 years of war turned and fled from a man who had just woken up, because what they felt from him was something no courage built in the darkness can stand against. But I felt the change. You cannot be on a battlefield and not feel it when the momentum shifts. It is not a thing you see, not directly. It is a thing you feel through the vox chatter, through the pace of artillery, through the way the enemy forces in front of you start hesitating, where, before they were pressing, start pulling back where before they were pushing. Something is happening behind them. Something has changed the calculus. I do not know what it is yet, but I know it, the way any experienced soldier knows the moment a battle starts to turn. Then the word comes through. Not official channels. Nothing this significant reaches the front through official channels quickly, because official channels are buried in bureaucracy and security protocols and the instinct to control information. It comes through soldier channels. Whisper networks. The thing one trooper says to another in the darkness of a collapsed tab block, half disbelieving, half reverent, voice dropping on the last word like they're saying something that might not be real if they say it too loudly. The Primarch is here. Guilliman walks among us again. I watch the troopers around me when the word reaches them. I watch the Cadians and the Armageddon Steel Legion, and the 3 Mordians who have ended up in my section somehow, and are fighting with the same parade ground precision as ever even here, even now. And I watch something happen to their faces that I do not think any medical or psychological text has adequate terminology for. It is not exactly joy. It is not exactly relief. It is something more fundamental than either of those. It is the expression of people who have been fighting in the dark for a very long time and have just seen, far away, the first light of something that might not be darkness. It does not stop the battle. The fighting continues. The Chaos forces do not suddenly surrender because a Primarch has arrived. But the pace changes. The pressure from the other side eases slightly as forces are redirected to counter the new threat that Guilliman represents. And in that slight easing, we breathe. We consolidate. We hold ground we had been being pushed off of. We count our dead and distribute ammunition from the bodies we cannot otherwise help. And we keep going. This is the phase of the battle that historians summarize in a few paragraphs. The stabilization after Guilliman's arrival, the period of 2 or 3 weeks where the Imperium transitions from being pushed back to holding and then, in a few places, pushing forward. Historians summarize it quickly because from the outside it looks like a lull, a pause, a gathering before the final acts. From the inside, it is some of the most brutal, exhausting, dehumanizing combat I have ever been part of. It is urban fighting in the ruins of cities that were once among the most heavily fortified positions in the galaxy. It is hand-to-hand fighting in tunnels so narrow that power armor cannot be worn, where the advantage of a Space Marine's transhuman body counts for more than any weapon, because a very large and very strong human being in a confined space is a terrifyingly effective weapon. It is snipers and booby traps and poison water supplies and entire blocks of HAB buildings that have been wired to explode. It is the kind of warfare that does not produce heroic narratives. It produces survivors. I am a survivor. During this period, I meet a Black Templar. One of theirs has ended up detached from his unit in the confusion of a particularly nasty engagement near what used to be a water purification facility, and he fights alongside my section for 4 days before his chapter's forces can reach us to bring him back. His name is Brother Aldereth, and he is roughly 8 feet tall in his ancient Crusader pattern armor, and he has a cross on his pauldron and a chain sword and a level of hatred for chaos that puts even my own feelings on the subject in perspective. He does not speak much. When he does, it is usually something brief and violent and theologically charged. But he is an extraordinary fighter to have beside you. And on the 3rd day of our acquaintance, he saves my life without acknowledging that he has done so, which I think is probably exactly how he prefers it. I think about him sometimes. About the Black Templars as a whole, actually. A chapter that has been on crusade, continuous, permanent crusade, always fighting, never returning to a fixed home for 10,000 years. What does that do to a warrior's soul? What does it do to their sense of self, their sense of purpose? To be always moving, always fighting, always serving. I suppose it makes them exactly what Aldereth is, utterly certain of their purpose. Utterly without doubt, utterly without the existential questioning that plagues the rest of us. Is that admirable? I think it probably is. Is it also a little terrifying? Absolutely yes. But I digress. The thing that changes the battle, the thing that finally definitively shifts the balance, begins with an event far from my position, in the ruins of a city I will not name for reasons that will become clear. That involves Creed and his operation to activate the pylons. Part 10. The Death of Heroes. Creed's plan to activate the pylons requires teams. Multiple teams, each assigned to a specific pylon network, each tasked with reaching their assigned pylons, accessing them, and triggering the activation sequence that Belisarius called the Archmagos, who turns out to have been preparing for this possibility for a very long time, has been able to decode from ancient data cores whose existence was known to almost nobody. The teams go out. Some of them make it to their objectives. Some of them do not. The Chaos forces know that something is happening. They can feel the pylon's potential. Because beings of the warp are sensitive to anything that suppresses the warp, the way any creature is sensitive to things that threaten it. And they throw forces at any Imperial unit moving in the direction of a pylon. The battles around the pylon sites are some of the most intense of the entire campaign. Warriors dying specifically to prevent an enemy from touching an ancient stone spire that they cannot entirely understand but whose importance they can feel in the warp-touched portions of their biology. And Creed himself goes to one of the pylon sites. I am out there. I cannot tell you exactly what happened, because I am reconstructing it from multiple accounts, some reliable and some less so, filtered through the fog of war and the deliberate obscuring of certain details by those who were present and found them too painful to describe precisely. But the essence is this. Creed reaches the pylon. His team fights their way through chaos resistance that is heavier than anything they anticipated. Multiple members of the team die. Creed himself is wounded, though accounts differ on the severity. They reach the pylon and they begin the activation sequence, and it is working. It is actually working. The pylon network is responding. And then something happens that nobody predicted. Abaddon anticipated this. Of course he did. 10,000 years of strategic thinking, 12 previous crusades. And he has absolutely spent time thinking about the pylons and what happens if someone tries to use them against him. He has a counter. Not a counter to the pylons themselves. Even he cannot directly block their activation once the sequence begins, but a counter to the planet. He drops a blackstone fortress on it. A blackstone fortress. Ancient structures predating the Imperium, constructed from material called blackstone that has profound warp-interacting properties, massive enough to serve as mobile space stations, powerful enough to destroy star systems, if their weapons are properly charged and aligned. Abaddon has been collecting them for years. He has 6 of them in his fleet, and they are one of the great wild cards of his arsenal. Weapons that the Imperium has no direct equivalent for. And he turns one of them, not fires it at Cadia as a weapon, nothing so direct, but brings its gravity into contact with Cadia's, allows the Blackstone Fortress to add its mass to the equation of a planet's structural integrity. And the result is catastrophic. Cadia begins to come apart. This is the moment I described at the beginning. The moment I am standing in Croft Garrison and the ground starts shaking in a way that has nothing to do with artillery. The moment the sky breaks open and the planet groans. The moment I look up and see cracks in the world itself. Great rifts opening in the crust. Tectonic plates shifting in ways that should take millions of years happening in hours. Cadia is dying. And in the middle of all of this, in the middle of the dying and the rubble of a broken world, beside a pylon that is still operational but whose planet is ceasing to exist around it, Creed is standing. He is given the opportunity to leave. His Vox operator has a route. There are transports. There is a way out. He is told by people who care about him and by people who simply recognize that the Lord Castellan of Cadia is an asset worth preserving, that there is still time, that the Imperium needs him, that his death here accomplishes nothing that his life elsewhere could not accomplish more effectively. And Creed looks at the planet he was born on, the planet he has defended for 50 years, the planet that is dying around him. And he says something that has been reported in several different versions, and I cannot tell you which is accurate because I was not there, but the consensus version, the version that rings truest to me, knowing what I know of the man, is this. He says, Cadia stands. And then he does what any Cadian does when faced with a situation that cannot be survived. He fights anyway. He is never seen again. Lord Castellan Ursarker E. Creed, the finest military commander the Imperium of Man has produced in 3 centuries, the defender of Cadia, the architect of more victories than any other individual in the history of the Astra Militarum, disappears into the dying earth of his homeworld. Whether he activated the pylon before the end, or whether it activated on its own from the sequence already running, or whether it was one of the other teams that completed the network, the historians argue about this. I do not care about the historical argument. What I care about is what the man did with his last moments. And what he did was stand on his dying world and refuse to stop being what he had always been. That is what a Cadian does. That is what we all do. Part 11. The planet breaks. Now, I am back in Croft Garrison and the world is ending. And I need to tell you what that is actually like. Because stories about the destruction of planets tend to happen at a distance. Observed from orbit, a sphere cracking open into fragments while music plays and the camera pulls back for a wide shot. I did not have that experience. I was on the surface when Cadia died. And I can tell you that from the surface, a planet dying is not cinematic. It is not beautiful, even in a terrible way. It is not anything like what fiction prepares you for. It is noise, the loudest noise you have ever heard, sustained and continuous. A bass note from the earth itself, so powerful that it bypasses your ears and resonates directly in your bones and your organs. The ground shakes with a frequency that has no comparison in normal seismic activity. This is not an earthquake. This is a planet's crust fragmenting. Plates that have been stable for 4 billion years, suddenly losing the structural integrity that held them in place. And the energy of that destabilization releasing in every direction simultaneously. You cannot stand. You cannot run. You can barely crawl. The rubble that was already omnipresent in Croft Garrison becomes a moving thing, a flow of stone and metal that goes in directions you cannot predict. And the sky is wrong in ways that go beyond the cracks. Because as the planet comes apart, the pylons begin to fail. Not all of them. Not yet. Some of them are still active, and the warp boundary that they maintain begins to collapse. And when the warp boundary collapses, things begin to cross over, not in an organized fashion, not the intentional warp breach of a deliberate demon summoning, just seepage, the ambient demonic presence that the pylons have been holding back for 10,000 years, bleeding through the cracks in a dying world. And it does things to the sky, colors that do not exist in the visible spectrum, somehow being perceived anyway, shapes in clouds that should not be able to form, a physical feeling, like pressure in the sinuses, but worse, like the air itself pushing back against the act of breathing. That is what the warp feels like when it gets close. People break. Not everyone, not most, but some. I see a trooper from the Armageddon Steel Legion, a veteran, a good soldier, someone who has been steady throughout, simply sit down in the middle of everything and look at the sky and stop responding to stimulus. Not wounded, not afraid. Something in him has concluded that the situation is outside the parameters of what can be addressed by any known response, and he has shut down. I do not judge him. I cannot judge him. I understand him completely. I simply do not have the luxury of joining him. What keeps me functional in this moment? And I have thought about this many times, trying to identify it precisely, is not faith. Not exactly. It is not the Emperor's light or prayers or religious conviction, though I respect all of those and others. What it is Cadia, the idea of it. The thing that the name means, that 10,000 years of defending this choke point means, that my mother and my grandmother and every soldier who ever stood on this ground means. If Kree can stand beside a pylon and say Cadia stand while the planet cracks beneath him, then I can stand in the ruins of Croft Garrison and do my job. I start moving people. That is what there is to do. Move them. Get them out of the collapsing structures. Get them away from the new fissures opening in the ground. Get them to the transport collection points that the Vox has been screaming about for the last hour. Because someone above my pay grade has made the decision that is both necessary and devastating. Cadia cannot be held. The planet is dying. The survivors need to leave. Evacuating from a dying planet under active enemy fire while the sky goes wrong is an experience I am not sure language is adequate to describe. The Chaos forces are still fighting. Some of them are celebrating. You can see it, you can hear it in their Vox chatter that we intercept, the howling and the ritual shouts that mean victory, that mean their gods are pleased. Some of them are dying, because a planet dying is not selective about whose side you are on. Some of them are simply continuing to fight, because they are beings of the warp, and the dissolution of physical reality around them is not inherently disorienting to creatures that live in a dimension where reality is optional. The transports come down through the broken sky like falling stars. Military landers, civilian evacuation ships pressed into service. The smallest and most maneuverable ships in the orbiting fleet coming down into an atmosphere that is tearing itself apart to extract as many survivors as possible. They are taking fire from Chaos forces. They are navigating debris falling from orbit, hulks of destroyed ships, pieces of the Blackstone fortress that has been damaged in the ongoing void battle. They are landing on ground that is actively breaking apart and loading survivors, and taking off again and coming back for more, again and again and again, the pilots performing individual acts of courage, so extraordinary and so continuous that by the end, nobody can even count them. I get a section of 31 survivors to a landing zone. 26 of them are Cadians. The other 5 are from 2 different off-world regiments, and one of them does not speak any language I know. We wait. The ground shakes. Things fall from the sky. A Chaos gunship strafe the LZ, and we lose 4 people, and I do not think about those 4 people. Not then. Not until much later when I can afford to. A transport comes down, and I push soldiers onto it, and I am the last one on, and it is lifting off, and I look down through the viewport, and I see Cadia. Not the surface. Not the garrison, or the ruins, or the fortifications. The planet. For just a moment, as the transport clears the atmosphere, I see it from outside, from the perspective of orbit. And it is beautiful, and it is dying, and it is the first and only time in my life that I really understand at a cellular level, that home is not a place you can lose and still have, that a world is not just geography, that there is something in the soil of the place that made you, something that exists in no other soil in the universe. And when that soil is gone, something that was you goes with it. The planet below me cracks. Great fractures running across the continents. Pieces of the crust lifting away from the body of the world, trailing atmosphere and cloud. Tumbling into space, trailing fire. And beneath them, for just a moment before the ejecta clouds and the expanding debris field obscure everything, I can see the interior, that deep, terrible orange of planetary mantle, of the Earth's own heat-given light, of the core of the world exposed for the first time in 4 billion years to the vacuum of space. Cadia, my home, the fortress world, the planet that stood for 10,000 years. Gone. Part 12, What Remains. The transport that carries me away from Cadia takes me to a battle cruiser called the Ethon's Reach. It is not a ship I know. It belongs to a fleet I have not served with before. The corridors are too wide and the lighting is slightly wrong, and it smells like every Imperial ship smells. Recycled air and machine oil and the particular synthetic quality of processed rations. But all of it is slightly off. The way a dream of a familiar place is slightly off, because it is not mine. None of it is mine. There are survivors everywhere on this ship. Not just Cadians, soldiers from a dozen different forces that were on Cadia when the end came. They are sitting in corridors and in cargo bays and in the void suit storage rooms that have been converted to temporary billets. Some are injured. Some are simply exhausted to the point where they cannot move, cannot sleep, cannot do anything except exist in the peculiar limbo of people who have been through something that has not yet fully processed. I know the state. I know it from other campaigns, other catastrophes. The body can outrun the mind for days, sometimes weeks. And then one day the mind catches up and you spend a while in territory that is not easy to navigate. I find a corner of a cargo bay. I sit down. I clean my loss gun, because that is something I know how to do without thinking about it. And not thinking about things is, right now, what I need most. Around me, other Cadians are doing similar things. The small rituals of soldiers between battles, the maintenance of equipment, and the silence that means not yet, not yet. I am not ready to think about this yet. A trooper sits down next to me. Young. Too young, honestly. Not even 20, I think. He is from a Cadian regiment. I do not know the 247th, if his column markings are accurate. And he has the expression of someone who is trying very hard to keep his face neutral and not quite succeeding. He does not say anything. I do not say anything. We sit there while the ship moves through the void, taking us away from the ruin of our world. And eventually he leans against the bulkhead and closes his eyes, and I watch the ship's crew move through the bay, doing their things, and I think about Creed, about the last thing he might have seen, whether the pylon network activated before the end, or whether it activated after, or whether it was one of the other teams. I think about Vero, and whether she is on this ship or another, and whether she survived. I think about my mother, who is too old to serve now, and has been on Cadia in civilian capacity for the last decade. And I do not let myself think too long about what that means. I think about Brother Aldereth of the Black Templars, and whether transhuman warriors who have been on crusade for 10,000 years have a different relationship to the concept of home than I do, whether losing a world means something different to someone who has never had one. I think about the Eye of Terror, and whether it is already growing, already expanding into the space Cadia occupied, already swallowing the ruins of my world. I think about the pylons, the ones that were activated before the planet died, and whether their activation, partial and incomplete as it was, has done anything meaningful, or whether Abaddon has won so completely that it does not matter. And I think about Guilliman. The Primarch is not dead. He got off Cadia. Multiple sources confirm it, and I believe them, because you do not come back after 10,000 years just to die in the first battle you fight. He is out there, somewhere in this fleet, in whatever ship is big enough to command from. And I think about what he must be thinking. A man who went asleep, in a manner of speaking, with the Imperium of man at the height of its power, who woke up to find it diminished and frightened and broken in ways that he could not have imagined, and who has now watched one of its greatest worlds die in his first weeks back. What do you do with that? How do you hold all of that? How do you choose to keep going? I find out in a way the next morning, ship's morning, which has nothing to do with any real sun, when a Vox announcement comes through the Ethon's Reach's general broadcast system. It is Guilliman himself. I recognize the voice from descriptions, deep, accented with something that sounds like no living accent, because it belongs to a civilization 10,000 years dead, measured and absolutely certain in a way that no amount of grief or loss can apparently shake. He does not spend long on consolation. A Primarch's address is not a therapy session. He says what happened. He says what it cost. And then he says what comes next. The 13th Black Crusade has broken through. Cadia has fallen. The Eye of Terror is expanding. The Cicatrix Maledictum. The Great Rift, he calls it. The wound in reality that is now opening across the width of the galaxy is a catastrophe without precedent in 10,000 years of Imperial history. And so he says, something without precedent is required in response. The Indomitus Crusade. He would take the largest military force assembled since the Horus Heresy. Marines and Guard and Navy and Mechanicus and Sororitas and everything else the Imperium can muster. And he is going to drive it across the galaxy. He is going to relieve besieged worlds. He is going to retake lost systems. He is going to push back against the demonic incursions spreading from the new rift. He is going to remind every world that still holds out, every garrison that is still fighting, every soldier and citizen and administrator who has not given up. He is going to remind them that they are not alone. The Imperium is not dead. It is wounded. It is diminished. It is changed in ways that will never be undone. But it is not dead. And as long as it is not dead, there is something worth fighting for. Part 13. The wound that will not heal. But I want to be honest with you about something that Guilliman's address does not cover, that the propaganda does not cover, that the hopeful narrative of the Indomitus Crusade setting out to restore and reclaim does not fully address. Because there is something that happened when Cadia fell that cannot be fixed by a military campaign, no matter how large or how brave or how well led. The Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift. When Cadia fell and the pylons were destroyed or damaged beyond function, the warp suppression effect they maintained over the region collapsed. And the Eye of Terror, which had been held at bay for 10,000 years, expanded. Not just a little, not just into the space Cadia occupied. Expanded massively, catastrophically, tearing open a wound across the entire galaxy from the galactic core to the outer rim. A rift in reality thousands of light years long, separating the galaxy into two halves. The Imperium Sanctus, the half that still has reliable access to the Astronomicon, that can still navigate relatively safely through the warp, that is still, with effort, connected to Terra and the surviving infrastructure of the Imperium. And the Imperium Nihilus, the other half, the half on the far side of the Great Rift, the half where the Astronomicon cannot penetrate, where warp travel is enormously dangerous and unreliable, where worlds that were part of the Imperium yesterday are now cut off, fighting alone, unable to call for help or receive it. The Imperium Nihilus is not empty. There are billions of human beings living there, thousands of worlds, multiple star systems that have been part of the Imperium for 10,000 years. Forge worlds and hive worlds and agri worlds and feudal worlds and shrine worlds, all of them still inhabited, all of them still, for now, loyal or some portion of loyal, or at least not yet fallen to the various threats that the absence of Imperial contact and Imperial protection and the presence of a massive warp rift right on their doorstep is generating. But the Imperium cannot reach them easily, and they cannot reach the Imperium. And in the darkness of the Imperium Nihilus, in the space on the wrong side of the Great Rift, all sorts of terrible things are happening to all sorts of people who are trying to hold on without support and without hope and without any of the things that the Imperium, for all its flaws and oppressions and brutalities, at least provided as a framework for organized survival. This is the long-term consequence of Cadia's fall that nobody talks about, not the immediate military consequences, which were enormous and severe, not the symbolic blow to Imperial morale, which was devastating. The structural consequence, the fact that the galaxy is now in a very real and physical sense in two pieces, and the piece that contains Terra is separated from the piece that contains an enormous portion of the Imperium's population by a wound in reality that nobody knows how to close. The pylons could have maintained the eye at its previous size, could have prevented this expansion. The pylons are gone now, along with the planet that hosted them, and nothing in the Imperium's current technological arsenal, nothing that Call has yet produced, nothing in the archives of Mars or the vaults of the Space Marine chapters has been identified as a replacement. The Great Rift is permanent, or at least there's no current plan for making it otherwise. This is what Cadia's fall really means. Not just a world lost, not just a campaign lost, though it was both of those things. It means the galaxy is fundamentally changed. The shape of reality in this universe is different now than it was before the 13th Black Crusade. And every single living being in this galaxy, human, xenos, demonic, physical, and warp-bound both, is going to be navigating that changed reality for the rest of their existence, whether they are aware of it or not. Part 14. Abaddon's Victory and His Failure. Here is something that you may not expect me, as a Cadian, as a survivor of the battle that destroyed my world, to say. Abaddon won. He achieved his strategic objective. He destroyed Cadia. He caused the expansion of the Eye of Terror. He changed the shape of the galaxy in ways that benefit the forces of chaos enormously and damage the Imperium profoundly. He won. But, and this is a significant but, and it is the kind of but that military historians spend careers arguing about. And it is the kind of but that Abaddon himself, if he is capable of honest self-assessment, which beings of his nature generally are not, must occasionally sit with in the long watches of his demon world nights. He did not win completely. And in a 10,000-year war, incomplete victory is arguably a kind of defeat. The pylons were activated, partially, incompletely, not enough to stop the eye from expanding. Clearly not, given the Cicatrix Maledictum, but enough to do something, enough to create a suppression effect that, at the critical moment of Cadia's death, prevented what could have been an even more catastrophic demonic incursion from the expanding eye, enough to limit, in ways that chaos strategists are still calculating, the extent of the warp bleed into the physical universe. The galaxy is wounded, but it could have been more wounded. More of it could have been consumed by the warp in those first terrible hours after Cadia broke. The fact that it was not, that the expansion stopped where it did, that the Cicatrix Maledictum is enormous and terrible, but has recognizable edges rather than continuing to grow without limit, is, in part, attributable to those pylons, to the teams that fought and died to activate them, to Creed, standing beside a stone spire older than the Imperium, saying Cadia stands. And then there is Guilliman. Abaddon did not anticipate Guilliman. He could not have. Nobody anticipated Guilliman, because Call's project was a secret so deep and so long-running that even most of the Adeptus Mechanicus did not know it existed. The return of a Primarch is not something Abaddon's 10,000 years of planning had accounted for. He planned for the Imperium he knew, the post-heresy Imperium, the one missing its greatest leaders, the one that had been gradually weakening and ossifying for 10 millennia. He had not planned for the Imperium gaining back one of those leaders. And the Indomitus Crusade, the response that Guilliman launches in the aftermath of Cadia's fall, is something that Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade did not prevent, could not prevent, because it required a Primarch to lead it. And until Call finished his project, there was no Primarch to lead it. Cadia's fall created the conditions that forced the Imperium to act rather than react, to organize rather than stumble, to point at a threat and commit to addressing it rather than defending and hoping. And the instrument of that change, the catalyst, is a Primarch who came back from near death precisely because someone who cared about the future of the Imperium had been preparing for that possibility for 10,000 years. History is strange. The worst things that happen are sometimes the things that force the necessary responses. I am not going to tell you that Cadia had to fall. That would be obscene, a rationalization too grotesque for me to put in my mouth. Cadia should not have fallen. My world should still exist. Creed should still be alive. The billions of people who died in that campaign should still be breathing. The fact that something good came after does not redeem the evil that made it necessary. I want to be very clear about that. But I am also a soldier, And soldiers deal in the world as it is, not as it should be. The world as it is contains a great rift and a returned Primarch and an Indomitus Crusade and a Cadian diaspora scattered across 10,000 ships and refugee camps and temporary billets on worlds that have never seen a Cadian before. The world as it is not the world I wanted, but it is the world I have, and I have to decide what to do with it. Part 15. The Cadian Diaspora. I want to tell you about what happened to the Cadians after the fall, because it is its own story. And it is a story that in many ways is still being written. There are somewhere between 2 and 3 million Cadian survivors. The estimate is imprecise because the evacuation was chaotic and records were lost, and people ended up on different ships, and some of those ships were destroyed after leaving Cadia, and some of those ships ended up in systems that are now on the wrong side of the Great Rift. 2 to 3 million people. That is the entire surviving population of a world, or at least the military-age portion of it, because civilian evacuation was severely limited by the speed of the planet's disintegration. 2 to 3 million people who were raised from birth to defend one specific piece of real estate, who have been doing so for their entire lives, who have a cultural identity so specific and so place-rooted that it is almost impossible to fully translate to people who have never been to that place. What do you do with that? What does a Cadian do when Cadia is gone? The answer, and I know this from personal experience and from watching my fellow survivors over the months and years following the fall, is that you do what Cadians have always done. You find something to defend. You find something worth fighting for. You orient yourself around a purpose. Because Cadians without a purpose are Cadians who will fall apart. And we have been taught since birth that falling apart is not an option. The Cadian regiments regroup. They reform. Because Cadian soldiers are comfortable in structures and uncomfortable outside them. They take in veterans from the campaign. They organize according to the doctrine they grew up with. They drill, and they maintain, and they argue about who outranks whom in the merged units. And all of this arguing and organizing and drilling is, I think, at least partly a mechanism for not having to sit still long enough to feel what we feel about our planet being gone. Some Cadians choose to fight on Cadia. Cadia Prime, they're calling it, the asteroid field and debris cloud that used to be the planet. Some of the larger fragments are inhabitable, technically, in the way that any rock with a pressurizable environment attached can be inhabited. Fortresses that were on geologically stable portions of the planet survived the initial destruction and are now floating in space, powered by their own generators, still occupied by soldiers who will not leave. They have proclaimed Cadia stance. The phrase has become something of a rallying cry, an identity, a way of saying that the idea of Cadia persists even if the physical planet does not. And they dig in on their asteroid fortresses and they fight the chaos forces that are still in the system, that are still trying to consolidate their victory and push further into the segmentum obscurus. Cadia stands. As a literal statement, it is physically impossible. As a statement of intent, it is the most Cadian thing I have ever heard. Some Cadians disperse. They are posted to other regiments, other campaigns, other corners of the Imperium that need experienced soldiers. I end up, after several transfers and a brief and unpleasant stint on a planet called Relander that I do not wish to discuss in detail, assigned to the forces of the Indomitus Crusade, Guilliman's force, the largest army assembled since the heresy. And it is there, aboard a transport vessel making its way toward the first objectives of the Crusade, that I finally, 3 months after the fall of Cadia, in the middle of a quiet watch cycle, when most of the ship is asleep, sit down against a bulkhead and let myself feel it. It is not what I expected. I expected grief, which is the obvious response, and grief is certainly there. But underneath the grief is something stranger, something that takes me a while to identify and longer to accept. It is relief. Not relief that Cadia fell. Nothing like that. Relief that I know what I am doing. Relief that the thing I was afraid of, the worst thing, the thing we built our entire civilization around preventing, has happened and I survived it, and I am still here, and I still know how to hold a lost gun and read a tactical situation and manage soldiers in extreme conditions. The worst thing happened, and I found out that the worst thing does not stop everything. That on the other side of the worst thing, there is still mourning and still work and still, perhaps something resembling a future. Cadia falls. The planet ends. 10,000 years of history concludes in a few days of catastrophic war. And the people who lived on it are still here. Still soldiers. Still Cadian, even without the planet. Because Cadia was never just a planet. It was an idea, a practice, a culture, a way of facing impossible odds and continuing to face them. Because what else are you going to do? Sit down? Give up? Tell the universe that it has won? The universe has not won. Not while any of us still breathe. Cadia stands. Part 16. The enemy we carry. There's something else I want to talk about before we get to the aftermath and what it means for the galaxy going forward. Something that sits at the heart of the Warhammer 40,000 universe in a way that I think people who come to it from the outside, people who see the Space Marines and the Gothic architecture and the incredible scale of the warfare, sometimes miss. The Chaos Gods are winning not because they are stronger than the Imperium in a straightforward military sense. They are winning because they are us. I mean that literally. The Chaos Gods are made from us, from humanity's emotions, from our fear and our anger and our excess and our despair. Every person who has ever been afraid, and in a universe like this one, that is everyone without exception, has fed Khorne or Tsench or Slaanesh or Nurgle in some small way. Every act of violence, every moment of corruption, every surrender to excess, every embrace of despair, all of it is warp energy, flowing from humanity into the dimension that the Chaos Gods inhabit, feeding them, strengthening them, making them more real and more powerful with every passing moment. The Imperium strategy against chaos has always been, at its core, a strategy of containment. Keep the eye from expanding. Keep the demons from crossing over in numbers. Keep humanity fighting rather than surrendering to chaos, because at least fighting produces negative emotions that feed the Chaos Gods less efficiently than the full surrender of a civilization to their specific patron's domain. It is a grim strategy. It is a strategy that has no endpoint. It is a strategy that amounts to saying, we will hold the line. Not forever, but for as long as we can, because as long as we hold the line, humanity survives. And as long as humanity survives, the possibility of something better persists. This is the darkness at the heart of the 40k universe. Not that the enemy is powerful. Not that the battles are brutal. The darkness is the knowledge that the enemy is not external. It is internal. The Chaos Gods grow stronger every time a human being gives in to the emotions they embody. Every war strengthens Khorne. Every act of political manipulation and scheming strengthens Tsench. Every civilization's decay and corruption strengthens Nurgle. Every indulgence, every excess, every moment of sensation sought at any price strengthens Slaanesh. The Imperium, by fighting its endless wars, by sustaining the violence and the fear and the suffering that keep humanity alive in the short term, is simultaneously feeding the gods that want to devour it. There's no clean solution to this, no easy answer, no strategic masterstroke that addresses the fundamental problem without creating new versions of the same problem. It is a trap, and the Imperium has known it was a trap for 10,000 years and has been unable to find a way out that does not involve being consumed by the trap anyway. And yet humanity persists. That is the thing. In a universe that is actively, comprehensively hostile to human existence. In a galaxy where every major faction wants humanity dead, or enslaved, or consumed, or converted. In a reality where the gods themselves are arrayed against the survival of the species. Humanity persists. It is not elegant. It is not clean. It involves enormous suffering and immense waste and regular catastrophes that should, by rights, be extinction events and somehow are not. But it persists. Cadia fell. The great rift opened. The galaxy is darker and more dangerous than it was before. And humanity is still here, still fighting, still building, still dying with weapons in their hands rather than surrendering to the darkness. Is that enough? Is mere survival enough? Should the goal be more than survival? Guilliman seems to think so. The Black Crusade is not just a military operation. It is a statement. A declaration that the Imperium intends not just to survive, but to reclaim, to rebuild, to push back. Whether it will succeed, whether that ambition can be realized in a galaxy that has just become significantly more hostile, is a question that history will have to answer. I am not a prophet. I am a sergeant with 41 years on the clock and a dead planet and a lost gun and a stubborn, perhaps irrational conviction that the job is not done. Let me tell you about some of the people I met in the Black Crusade, because stories are not just about events. They are about the people who lived through them. Part 17. The Black Crusade. People at the edge of the world. The first major operation I participate in as part of the Black Crusade is the relief of a world called Gathalammer. It is a shrine world, one of the ecclesiarchy's holy places, a world covered in vast cathedrals and pilgrim centers and administrative infrastructure for the mini-storm. It is not a major military world. It does not have large standing forces, and it has been in the path of a demonic incursion from the opening Cicatrix Maledictum, which means it has been facing forces from the warp without adequate military support for months. When we arrive, Gathalammer is 3/4 lost. The demonic forces have taken the major population centers. The surviving human population is concentrated in a handful of the largest cathedral complexes, massive structures of stone and ferrocrete in faith, whose thick walls have proved more durable in the face of demonic attack than anyone expected, perhaps because faith in the Warhammer universe is not entirely metaphorical. The Sisters of Battle defending those complexes have been fighting without relief for long enough that their numbers are down a fraction of their starting strength, but they have not broken, and they have not stopped. And the singing, the actual, literal singing that Adeptus Sororitas do while they fight, the devotional hymns that are part of their martial doctrine, has been heard continuously from inside those cathedral walls for months. I hear it when we approach the first complex. We are advancing through ruins, through streets that have been turned into nightmares by the demonic presence. And underneath all the sounds of combat, there is a voice, and then voices rising from behind stone walls. A hymn that I do not know the words to, but that carries in it something that functions like warmth in a cold place. The sisters are still singing. We fight through to them. It takes 3 days. It involves some of the most concentrated and brutal close-quarters combat I have participated in, because demonic forces in urban terrain are a very specific kind of horrible. They do not tire, they do not fear, they do not respect the rules of engagement or the laws of physics. And they can appear from places that should be solid walls when the warp is thick enough. But we get through, and when the gates of the cathedral complex open and the Sisters of Battle come out to meet us, something happens that I was not expecting. They do not look relieved. They do not look exhausted, though they clearly are. They look, I am searching for the right word, satisfied, like people who have been doing exactly what they were made to do, for as long as it needed doing, and are prepared to keep doing it indefinitely. One of them, a canoness, the commander of the force, a woman who might be 40 or might be 70, whose face tells the story of more battles than I can count, looks at me when I come through the gate and gives me a look that I can only describe as collegial, the look of one professional acknowledging another who has done their job. You took long enough, she says. The traffic was terrible, I say. She almost smiles. In her line of work, almost smiling is probably the equivalent of a standing ovation. I fight alongside Adeptus Sororitas for the next several months of the Gathalammer campaign. And I learned things about faith that I could not have learned any other way. Not theological faith. I am not equipped for that conversation. But practical faith. The faith that you carry like a tool. The faith that is not about believing everything will be fine, about being willing to act, as if it might be even when you have no evidence to support that belief. The sisters have this in quantities that are, frankly, humbling. They are not naive. They have seen things that would shatter lesser soldiers. They know in precise and tactical detail exactly what they are fighting and how hard it is to kill and what it will do to them if it gets through their lines. And they sing anyway. There's a lesson in that. I am still working out exactly what it is. Part 18. The Primarch up close. I see Guilliman twice during the Black Crusade, not in the sense of a formal audience or a briefing, in the sense of being in physical proximity to a being that occupies the same tactical reality you do, which is a specific and in some ways more informative experience than any formal meeting could provide. The first time, I am in a command post during the second week of the Gathalammer campaign, waiting to give a field report to the operations officer, when Guilliman comes through with his staff. His staff consists of Ultramarines officers and several individuals whose roles I cannot entirely identify. People from various institutions and chapters and specialized bodies within Imperium, all of them clearly very capable. All of them clearly also slightly in awe of the being they're walking behind. Guilliman himself is, how to describe this properly? You know how Space Marines are imposing? How their physical presence fills a room in a way that ordinary humans simply cannot match. Multiply that by whatever factor you think is appropriate for the difference between a Space Marine and a Primarch. He is large in a way that involves physics, but also involves something else that I do not have the vocabulary to precisely name. He takes up more space than his physical dimensions strictly require. Presence is the word people use, and it is accurate but insufficient. He stops in the middle of his route through the command post. He stops and looks at me. I say I do not know why he stops because I do not know. I am not remarkable. I am a sergeant with the right badges on my collar and the right bearing from decades of service, and nothing that should distinguish me from any of a dozen other sergeants in the room. But he stops, and he looks at me with blue eyes that are not the eyes of anything human, that have 10,000 years behind them and considerably more ahead of them. And he says, in a voice that is quiet but somehow carries without effort, he says one word, Cadian. Not a question, a recognition. He can see it somehow in my bearing, my kit, my insignia, something, and I straighten. Not because I am impressed or afraid, though I am both. Because it is the right thing to do. Because something in me responds to being recognized by something that old and that significant as automatically as it responds to officer stripes. Yes, sir, I say. He looks at me for another moment. Those blue eyes, 10,000 years and fresh grief and absolute determination, all in the same glance. And then he says, hold the line. And he moves on. That is all. Hold the line. 3 words. The most obvious possible instruction. The thing every soldier is already doing. The thing I do not need to be told. And yet, and this is the embarrassing part, the part one I'm not sure I would tell to anyone who is not also a veteran and also Cadian and also someone who has been on the wrong end of the kind of day I've been having, it helps. It helps in a way that is entirely disproportionate to the information content of those 3 words, which is essentially 0. It helps because of what he is and what those words mean coming from him. Because there is a Primarch, a son of the Emperor, a being who has seen more history than any library can hold. And he looks at me specifically and says, hold the line. The Imperium notices Cadians, even now, even after the fall. Whatever we have lost in terms of territory and numbers and the physical planet itself, we have not lost the thing that made people notice us in the first place. The Cadians are still here, still holding. The second time I see Guilliman is during a night attack on a position near the capital city of Gathalammer Prime, when a demonic breakthrough threatens to collapse the southern flank of the Imperial line. I am part of the force rushing to reinforce the southern flank, which means I am moving at double-quick march through ruins in the dark toward the sound of things that should not exist, making sound that should not be possible. And as we come around a corner and see the southern flank in question, I see Guilliman. He is fighting, actually fighting. I know that sounds obvious. He is a warrior of the First Order. But there's something different about seeing a Primarch in combat versus knowing abstractly that a Primarch is a mighty warrior. He's fighting a greater demon of Tsench, a creature of enormous power and impossible form, all shifting colors and too many limbs, and an aura of wrongness that makes the air taste strange even from 50 meters away. And Guilliman is fighting it the way an expert craftsman handles a complicated task. Not desperately, not dramatically, with a controlled, precise, almost Matter-of-fact application of exactly the right amount of force in exactly the right places. He is cutting it apart, systematically, not quickly. Greater demons are not quick to kill. And this one is fighting back with everything it has, but inevitably, there's no sense of doubt in how he moves. No sense of fear. There's something almost chilling about it, actually, because fear is the appropriate response to a greater demon, and the absence of fear is a reminder that the thing killing it is not human and is not operating by human rules. The demon dies. Guilliman does not stop to acknowledge this. He turns, assesses the tactical situation with a glance that takes perhaps half a second, points at 2 positions on the flanks of the breach, and says something to his officers. And the officers relay it, and forces move, and the breach is sealed. I have been in 100 engagements. I have fought under good commanders and under terrible ones. I have seen competence, and I have seen genius, and I have seen the particular combination of natural talent and long experience that produces the commanders who win the battles that should not be won. What I see in Guilliman is something beyond all of that. It is not just tactical. It is not just strength. It is a kind of absolute clarity about what is happening and what needs to happen and what the gap between those 2 things requires. A clarity so complete and so immediate that it makes complex problems simple the way a very bright light makes a dark room simple. I want to fight under this. And I recognize that this is a very specific and somewhat unexpected feeling for a veteran sergeant who prides himself on his autonomy and his professional self-sufficiency. I want to be led by this, by something that knows what it is doing in a fundamental bedrock, unshakable way that I can trust. We have been without that for a long time. The Imperium has been without that for a long time. And having it back, having even a partial version of the clarity and the confidence and the absolute professionalism of a Primarch is something that I did not know I needed until I was looking at it. Cadia falls, and a Primarch returns. The universe has a strange sense of balance. Part 19. What the Chaos Gods Feel. I have been spending a lot of this narrative inside the Imperial perspective, which makes sense, because that is my perspective. But I want to spend some time thinking about the chaos side of the story, not to sympathize with it, but to understand it, because understanding your enemy is, as every tactical manual ever written will tell you, the foundation of defeating them. What did Abaddon gain from the 13th Black Crusade? More than the destruction of Cadia, though that is immense. He gained the opening of the Cicatrix Maledictum. He gained the expansion of the Eye of Terror. He gained the weakening of the Astronomican's reach on the far side of the rift, meaning navigation through the warp in the Imperium Nihilus is harder, more dangerous, less reliable. He gained the isolation of a huge portion of the Imperium from its center, making coordination and reinforcement enormously more difficult. He gained, effectively, the physical splitting of his greatest enemy into 2 pieces that cannot easily communicate or support each other. These are enormous strategic gains. The 13th Black Crusade is, by any objective measure, Abaddon's greatest victory. 12 previous crusades were, in retrospect, the warm-up for this. And what did the Chaos Gods gain? Slaanesh gained an expansion of the Eye's influence, which is in essence an expansion of its domain. The other 3 Dark Gods gained similar benefits. The dissolution of warp boundaries in new regions means more of real space is accessible to demonic entities. More worlds are exposed to corruption and influence. The long night that chaos has always dreamed of, the final victory of the ruinous powers over physical reality, is now measurably closer than it was before. But, and here is the thing about the Chaos Gods that makes them different from conventional enemies. They do not want ultimate victory in the way that a human general wants victory. A human general wants to win the war, achieve their objectives, and then stop. The Chaos Gods do not want the war to stop. They want it to continue. Khorne does not want all humans dead. Dead humans cannot provide skulls and blood and acts of violence. Slaanesh does not want to consume all sensation. An universe with no remaining sources of sensation would leave it starving. Nurgle does not want to corrupt all life. Dead things do not suffer and decay in the interesting ways that living things do. Tzeentch does not want all plans to succeed. Completed plans are not as interesting as plans in motion. The Chaos Gods want the war to continue forever. They want entropy and suffering and change and excess to be permanent features of existence. In a strange, twisted way, they are more threatened by a clear and final chaos victory than the Imperium is by a clear and final imperial defeat. A universe entirely consumed by the warp, with nothing left for the dark gods to feed on, is not a victory. It is starvation. This is why the Chaos Gods, for all their power, are not able to simply end the Imperium when they have the opportunity. This is why, at the moment of Horus's greatest triumph, standing over the broken body of the Emperor on the bridge of his flagship, the victory is still not final. Because the Chaos Gods cannot afford final victories. They need the prey to keep running. They need the war to keep burning. They feed on it, which means, paradoxically, that the Imperium's strategy of endless resistance, of holding the line forever, of refusing to die even when dying would be easier, is not just a statement of human stubbornness. It is, in a cosmic sense, the correct response to an enemy that is sustained by the conflict itself. You do not win against the Chaos Gods by defeating them. You endure them. You persist in spite of them. You continue to exist in a universe that has been trying to end you since before your civilization began. And you do so not because you have a plan for final victory, but because the act of persisting is itself a form of defiance that the dark gods cannot fully process or absorb. Cadia stood for 10,000 years. It fell, and we are still standing. Tell me that is not its own kind of victory. Part 20. The Soldier's Theology. I am not a theologian. I want to be clear about that before I venture into territory that professional theologians in the ecclesiarchy would consider vastly above my authority to discuss. I am a sergeant, a soldier, a person whose relationship with questions of faith and meaning has been shaped entirely by combat and by the specific experience of living in the shadow of the Eye of Terror and watching the people I love die in defense of a piece of real estate that turned out to be the most important piece of real estate in the galaxy. But I have been thinking about something that the fall of Cadia and the return of Guilliman and the opening of the Great Rift have forced me to confront in ways that more comfortable circumstances might not have. What is the Emperor of mankind? I know what the official answer is. He is the God of humanity, the Divine Father, the Omniscia, the Star Child, the Corpse God, the Anathema. Every faction in the Imperium has a name for him, a theology about him, a specific and carefully maintained belief about his nature and his will and his plans for humanity. The ecclesiarchy says he is a divine being whose sacrifice sustains the Astronomicon and will, one day when the stars are right and humanity has proven itself worthy, lead to some form of final divine victory over the dark. The Mechanicus says he is the Omniscia, the embodiment of machine consciousness and technological aspiration. The Chaos worshippers say he is a dead tyrant whose mummified corpse is sustained by the psychic energy of 1 million sacrificed humans per year, which is a grim description of something that is actually literally happening. What I think the Emperor was a human being who was not exactly human in the ways that mattered most. I think he built something extraordinary and something deeply flawed at the same time. The way humans always do when they try to build civilization, magnificently and imperfectly and with the best intentions and the worst blind spots. I think his plan, whatever he was doing on Terra, that he would not explain to his sons, and that cost him his sons' trust and cost him everything, may or may not have been correct. I think he loved his children in a way that was real even when it was insufficient. I think he has been sitting on that golden throne for 10,000 years, in a condition that is worse than death and better than nothing. And whatever's left of him in there is still doing the one thing he can still do, which is keep the Astronomicon burning, keep the warp at bay, keep the light on, so that humanity can navigate. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, enormous, incomprehensible in its self-sacrifice. Whatever else you think of the Emperor, the fact that whatever is left of him is still there, still functioning, still holding the one thing that the Imperium most needs, that matters. That means something, and I think about what Guilliman is doing now, building, reforming, pushing back, a son doing what the father cannot. I think about the Primarchs who fell, and the Primarchs who survived, and the Primarchs who might yet be recovered, And I think about whether the Emperor's plan, the plan he would not explain, the plan that cost him everything, might have included the possibility of exactly this, of exactly the moment we are in now, of the worst thing happening and being survived, and the seeds of something better having been planted carefully enough to survive even the catastrophe that uproots everything else. I do not know. I am a sergeant. These questions are above my pay grade in every conceivable way. But I choose to believe that the worst thing happening is not the same as the last thing happening. I choose to believe that humanity has not come this far, through the age of strife and the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy and 10,000 years of constant war and the Fall of Cadia and the opening of the Great Rift, to simply stop. I choose to believe that the people I fought beside, the people I watched die, the world I watched come apart from orbit, that all of it meant something, that it is part of a story that is still being written. That story has no clean ending. I will not pretend it does. The 40,000th year of the imperial calendar is not the triumphant conclusion of a hero's journey. It is the middle of something, a terrible ongoing, immense middle that has no clear endpoint and no guaranteed conclusion. The enemies are real and powerful, and some of them are genuinely gods. The Imperium is wounded and flawed and in some ways barely recognizable as the civilization it once aspired to be. But it is here. We are here. Cadia is gone, and we are here. Cadia stands. Part 21. The Threat That Remains. I want to shift perspective once more before we head toward the conclusion, because there is something important about the state of the galaxy after Cadia's fall that requires acknowledging. Something that the heroic narrative of Guilliman's return and the Indomitus Crusade can obscure if we are not careful. The threats did not stop when Cadia fell. They multiplied. The Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift, has done more than split the Imperium geographically. It has unleashed demonic incursions that would previously have required specific ritual conditions to manifest are now happening spontaneously in regions close to the rift. Worlds that have been stable for millennia are suddenly experiencing warp phenomena. Psychers who were stable and controlled are losing control. Navigator families, those mutant humans whose third eye allows them to pilot ships through the warp, are reporting conditions in the Imperium that have no precedent in their extensive records. The warp is, for want of a better term, excited, agitated. The birth of the Cicatrix Maledictum and the expansion of the eye have disturbed patterns in the Imperium that have no precedent in their extensive records. The warp is, for want of a better term, excited, agitated. The birth of the Cicatrix Maledictum and the expansion of the eye have disturbed patterns in the Imperium that have been stable for thousands of years, and the ripple effects are propagating outward in ways that nobody can fully track or predict. The Tyranids, those vast alien organisms from outside the galaxy, those apex predators of civilizations, those beings for whom every living thing in the galaxy is simply food, continue their advance. Several hive fleets have been defeated or partially broken, but the main bodies of the swarm continue to press inward. The Tyranid hive mind, that vast alien intelligence distributed across billions of organisms, that mind that has no equivalent in any other form of consciousness in the galaxy, has learned from every engagement it has fought with Imperial forces. It adapts. Its organisms evolve in real time in response to threats. Every weapon the Imperium uses against it, every tactic that works, every strategy that inflicts losses. The hive mind notes it. And the next wave is different. The next wave has counters. The next wave has organisms specifically evolved to address the specific threats that killed the previous organisms. Fighting the Tyranids is like fighting a learning machine with the patience of geological time and the resources of a galaxy's worth of biological matter. The Imperium has inflicted enormous losses on the Tyranid fleets. The Tyranids do not care about losses the way entities that value individual survival care about losses. For the hive mind, the organisms it loses in battle are data. They were consumed by whatever killed them, which means the nutrients are not wasted from the hive mind's perspective. What matters is the information gained. And the Necrons, those ancient, undying, mechanical beings who once ruled the galaxy and who have been sleeping in their tomb worlds for 60 million years, who are now waking in increasing numbers, as their stasis systems age past reliable function, are a wild card that nobody has fully accounted for. They do not want the galaxy destroyed. They want the galaxy restored to their dominion. They are not interested in chaos or the tyrannids or the petty squabbles of young upstart civilizations. They want the galaxy back the way it was when they ruled it. And they have the technology and the near immortality and the numbers and the absolute institutional patience of beings who think in million-year timescales. The Necron dynasties that are waking now are doing so into a galaxy very different from the one they went to sleep in. And their response to that difference is being worked out on the bodies of everyone around them. And the orcs, those indestructible, cheerful, violent, impossibly numerous fungal warriors who breed by dying and who fight for the pure love of fighting, and who are held together by psychic field generated by their own group consciousness that makes their ramshackle technology work, because they believe it will work. The orcs are, in the long view, probably the single greatest existential threat to the Imperium that gets the least attention, because they are not sinister or mysterious or cosmic in the way chaos and the tyrannids and the Necrons are. They are just everywhere and numerous and individually enthusiastic about violence and collectively almost impossible to permanently defeat because you cannot kill orc civilization. You can only kill individual orcs, and individual orcs are really just walking spore factories for the next generation of orcs. So killing them is actually, in a horrible sense, counterproductive. The galaxy in the aftermath of Cadia's fall is not a simpler place than it was before. It is a more complicated one. The threats have multiplied. The resources have been stretched thinner. The Great Rift has created complications that cascade through every strategic calculation in every theater of war simultaneously. The Indomitus Crusade is doing what it can, and what it can is considerable. But it is one response to a problem that is, in its totality, larger than any single response can address. The work is immense. The work is perhaps endless. The work does not care how tired you are. You do the work anyway, because that is what there is. Part 22. Lessons from the Dead. I have buried a lot of people in my career. Not personally buried. There is rarely time for that on active campaign. And the Imperium's logistics do not generally extend to treating the dead with the same attention it gives to the living and the wounded. But I have been present at the dying of a great many people. And in the quieter moments of my service, the moments between deployments, the brief periods of something approaching normalcy, I have thought about them and what they taught me. Sergeant Elise Vero, who survived the chest wound at Croft Garrison and is, as far as I know, still alive somewhere in the Indomitus Crusade. What she taught me was the specific value of absolute professional competence. Not passion, not inspiration, competence. The ability to function correctly under any circumstances, to assess accurately under pressure, to make decisions that are right rather than decisions that feel right. She was never inspiring in the way that decorated heroes are inspiring. She was better than inspiring. She was reliable, and reliable, in a universe that is trying to kill you, is worth more than inspiring any day of the week. The young trooper from the 247th who sat next to me in the cargo bay of the Ethon's reach in the hours after Cadia's fall, and leaned against the bulkhead and closed his eyes. I do not know his name. I never asked it, which is a failure on my part that I cannot remedy now, because I have never been able to find him in the regiment's records. What he taught me was something about the specific courage of very young soldiers who have been asked to face things that nobody should have to face, who do not have decades of experience to protect them or professional calluses to distance them from the immediacy of catastrophe, who are simply there, in the middle of something enormous, and they are scared and they are sad, and they keep going anyway, because what else is there to do? Brother Aldereth of the Black Templars. What he taught me, and this took me a long time to fully understand, was something about the relationship between certainty and effectiveness. Aldereth was certain in ways that I, as someone who has spent a lot of time thinking about the complications and contradictions of the universe I inhabit, am not capable of. He was certain that what he was doing was right, that the cause he served was just that the universe would be better if the specific things he was doing to specific enemies with specific weapons were continued until the enemy was dead. This certainty made him, in combat, extraordinarily effective. It also made him, in conversation, somewhat limited. But I have come to think that certainty of that particular kind, not intellectual certainty, not philosophical certainty, but operational certainty, the certainty that this, right here, right now, is the right thing to do, is not a failing. It is a tool, a very effective one. And the fact that I cannot access it does not mean I should not respect it in others. Lord Castellan, whom I served under at a great enough remove that I cannot claim to have known him, but whom I have studied in some depth in the months since his disappearance. What he taught me, what he embodied, is the most important and the most difficult lesson I know, that the job is the job regardless of what the job costs, that you do not get to put it down because it is too heavy, that someone has to stand beside the pylon when the planet is coming apart and say Cadia stands, not because it will necessarily make a difference, but because someone has to. And you are here, and the someone is you. The job is the job. You do it until you can't. And when you can't, you do it anyway, because that is what it means to be what you are. These are the people the 13th Black Crusade took from us, and the people it made more visible by the light of the fire it created. And they will not be the last. The fires in this galaxy are not going out. There will be more campaigns, more crises, more planets lost and more planets defended, and more moments in more cargo bays where someone sits against a bulkhead and tries to figure out how to hold all of it. But there will also be more people who figure out how. More Varos and more creeds and more young troopers from the 247th who close their eyes and somehow, the next morning, open them again. More Black Templars who sing their hymns while they fight. More Sisters of Battle who hold cathedral walls with depleted forces and still keep the gates until relief arrives. More Primarchs coming back from the places they have been sleeping. Angry and grief-stricken and absolutely determined to not let this story end with darkness. The galaxy burns. It has been burning for 10,000 years. You can either be burned by it, or you can be the one holding the bucket. I know which one I am. I have known since I was old enough to field strip a lost gun in the dark on a world that no longer exists. Part 23. The Voice Behind the Eye. I want to tell you about something that happened to me about 6 months into the Indomitus Crusade, on a world I will call Threshold Station for reasons of operational security. Even at this remove, Threshold Station is not its real name. Its real name is known to people with higher clearances than I had then or have now. What I can tell you is that it is a facility of some kind, an ancient one, pre-imperial, built by a civilization that was not human, on the edge of a system close to the new boundaries of the Cicatrix Maledictum. We are there as part of a security operation. Something was detected inside the facility. Something that should not be there. Something that is not, as far as the advanced teams can determine, demonic in the conventional sense. It does not register on Psychosense as warp energy. It is not manifesting in the ways that demonic entities manifest. It is not doing the things that demonic entities do. But it is there, and it is active. And people who go into certain sections of the facility do not come back. I am part of the second team sent in. We have better equipment than the first team, better intelligence about where the problem zones are, better preparation. We go in carefully. We go in with our weapons hot and our fear under control and our communication discipline tight. And we get deeper than the first team did before we find anything. What we find is not a demon. It is a room, a chamber. Ancient, clearly the architecture is pre-human, built on proportions that suggest the beings who used it were not shaped like us. And in the center of the chamber, preserved somehow against the passage of whatever enormous span of time has passed since this facility was inhabited, there is a device, an artifact, something made of the same material as the Cadian pylons, or something very like it. That quality of existing in both real space and the warp simultaneously that I mentioned earlier, that sense of something occupying more dimensional reality than it should. And it is doing something, functioning, running some program or process that was begun an almost inconceivable amount of time ago and is still running, still executing, still doing whatever it was designed to do. One of my troopers, a young woman named Kale who has a mild psyker sensitivity that the screening process somehow missed or possibly found and elected to ignore for operational reasons, starts reacting to the device. Not badly, not at first. She stops walking. She stands very still, and she looks at the device with the expression of someone who is hearing something at the edge of audibility, something so quiet that you have to be completely still to catch it. I ask her what she is hearing. She does not answer immediately. When she does, her voice has a quality that I do not like, not possessed, not controlled, not in the conventional sense of those terms, but distanced. Like she is reporting from a long way away. She says they are still here. I ask who? She says the ones who built it, not here in person, but here in the work. The work is still running because they put themselves into the work. The memory of what they intended. They wanted something to hold, something to maintain. They knew about the wound. They have always known about the wound, and they built things to hold it closed. Because even they, whatever they were, however different from us, even they knew that the alternative was worse. Even they wanted the universe to last. I do not know what to do with this information. I do not know what it means. The tech priests who eventually study the facility in exhaustive detail tell me that the device is indeed Necron in origin, from the War in Heaven period, which predates humanity's evolution as a species, and that its function is consistent with the suppression systems that the Cadian pylons used to perform. A backup, a contingency, something put in place by beings who thought across timescales that make 10,000 years look like a lunch break, in case the primary systems failed. The Necrons built the pylons. The Necrons built the backups. The Necrons, those ancient, undying mechanical beings who are now waking across the galaxy, built infrastructure to hold the warp at bay not in human living memory, but in the living memory of beings who predate humanity by millions of years. I do not know what to do with this. Kel does not know what to do with it. The tech priests eventually classify the whole thing at a level that means I am technically not cleared to have discussed it in this narrative. I am discussing it anyway, because I think it matters. Because I think that the galaxy we are fighting for is more complicated and more interesting and in certain ways more hopeful than the straight military narrative makes it seem. Because there are things in this universe that want it to continue. Not just humanity, not just the Imperium, but things older and stranger and more patient than us, that have been working toward that end since before we existed. We are not alone in wanting the universe to survive. We are not even the most important beings working toward that end. We are perhaps the most immediately relevant ones, the ones who are most visibly fighting the fight in the present moment. But the project of keeping reality intact is bigger than the Imperium and bigger than any single civilization story. That should be humbling. I find it in a strange way comforting. Part 24. The Galaxy Today. Let me bring us to the present, or as close to the present as I can get, which is to say the current moment in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, the 42nd millennium, the era that opened with the Fall of Cadia and the return of Guilliman and the opening of the Great Rift. The Indomitus Crusade has concluded, in the sense that its main operational phase has ended and the forces have been dispersed to various strategic priorities. It did not fix everything. Nothing could have fixed everything. But it did what it set out to do. It relieved enough besieged worlds, retook enough lost systems, demonstrated enough imperial capability and resolve. But the cascade of failures that might have followed Cadia's fall was interrupted. The worst-case scenario, where the loss of Cadia immediately led to a domino effect of planetary falls and warp incursions that consumed more and more of the Imperium before any effective response could be organized. That scenario did not happen. Guilliman governs. He sits with obvious discomfort, with a clear preference of a warrior for the battlefield over the council chamber, in the seat of Imperial Regent, exercising powers that have not been exercised by a single individual since the Emperor walked among men. He is reforming things, slowly, because the Imperium is enormous and its institutions are ancient, and their inertia is geological but visibly. He is trying to drag the Imperium in a direction that better resembles what the Emperor originally intended, not the theological theocracy that the ecclesiarchy represents, not the technological orthodoxy that the Mechanicus enforces, but something more like a civilization, something with rules that protect people rather than just exploiting them, something that justifies its own survival by being worth surviving. Whether he will succeed is the question of this age. The Primarchs continue to be a factor. There are others. Lionel Johnson, the Primarch of the Dark Angels, has returned. Robot Guilliman has returned. Whether others will is a question that military strategists and warp seers and chaos sorcerers all have strong opinions about and equally uncertain answers. The possibility exists. In a universe where a man can come back from 10,000 years of near death, anything is possible. And Abaddon? Abaddon is still out there. The Eye of Terror is his domain and his fortress and his perpetual base of operations. The Cicatrix Maledictum has given him resources and access and strategic options he did not have before. He is not resting on the achievements of a 13th Black Crusade. He is planning, gathering, building toward whatever comes next. Because Abaddon always plans. Abaddon has been planning for 10,000 years. And the one thing that 10,000 years of experience teaches you is patience. The next Black Crusade is coming. I do not know when. I do not know what form it will take. I do not know what objective Abaddon has fixed on now that Cadia is gone and the Great Rift is open and the strategic reality has changed in ways that his previous 12 campaigns could not have fully anticipated. But it is coming. Of that I am as certain as I am certain of anything. And we will face it. We will face it the way Cadians have always faced the worst things the universe can do. With weapons in our hands and our feet planted on the ground and the absolute, bedrock refusal to believe that this is the last day. Because the last day has not come yet. And as long as it has not come, there is work to do. Part 25. The stories we tell. There is a reason I am telling you all of this. And it is not only a therapeutic one, though talking about it is, I acknowledge, better than not talking about it. The reason I'm telling you all of this is because stories matter. In a universe as vast and as dark and as complicated as the one I live in, the stories we tell about it, the way we frame it, the aspects we emphasize, the conclusions we choose to draw from its events, those stories of power. The Ecclesiarchy knows this. The mini-storm has been managing the stories of the Imperium for 10,000 years, shaping the narrative of human history into a form that serves their institutional needs. The chaos powers know it. They are sustained by stories, by the narratives of fear and rage and excess and despair that human beings tell themselves in their darkest moments. Even the Necrons know it in their cold and ancient way, the story of a galaxy that belongs to them, that was theirs before upstart civilizations of soft biological creatures came along, is a story that drives everything they do. The story I want to tell, the story I am trying to tell, is this: that the darkness is real, and the loss is real, and the suffering is real, and none of it needs to be sanitized or minimized or turned into something it is not. Cadia fell. My world is gone. Billions of people died. The galaxy has a wound in it that may never fully heal. All of that is true, and it is enormous, and it is not okay, and it never will be okay. And also we are still here. The people who survived, the institutions that bent but did not break, the values that proved worth holding onto in the worst possible circumstances, the connections between human beings that persist even in the rubble of everything they built. All of that is also true. The darkness is real, and the endurance is also real. Both things together, without one canceling out the other. That is the story of Warhammer 40,000 at its best. Not a story of inevitable victory or inevitable defeat. Not a story of pure heroism or pure horror. A story of beings human, post-human, inhuman, barely comprehensible, all doing whatever it is in their nature to do, in a universe that is trying to consume all of them. And the question of who wins and who loses and what winning and losing even mean in the largest possible frame. I do not know how the story ends. Nobody does. The gods, the chaos gods, the emperor, whatever other powers exist in this reality, may know or may not. I am not privy to their deliberations. What I know is this: I am Sergeant Aldrich, formerly of the 8th Cadian Shock Troops, currently on assignment with the forces of the Indomitus Crusade, 41 years old, 23 years of service, 2 wounds, and several more that were not recorded properly. And one dead planet that I carry with me everywhere I go, the way you carry the face of someone you loved who is gone. I am still a soldier. I still know what to do. I still get up in the morning, or what passes for morning on a ship in the void, and I put on my kit, and I check my lost gun, and I look at whatever tactical situation the day has presented me with, and I figure out what needs to be done. It is not glamorous. It is not, in most moments, particularly heroic. It is just work. The work of someone who has a specific set of skills in a universe that has a specific and continuous need for those skills. The work is the work. Cadia stands. And as long as any of us who carry it in our chests are still standing, the world that made us is not entirely gone. The planet is rubble in the void. But Cadia, the idea, the practice, the refusal, the absolute and entirely unjustifiable conviction that today is not the last day, that the line will hold, that the worst thing the universe can do is not enough to make us stop, Cadia lives. In every Cadian who breathes, in every soldier who was shaped by that tradition, who drilled in that doctrine, who learned to strip a lost gun before they learned to read. In every regiment that carries the Cadian Eagle even now, deployed to a dozen fronts across a wounded galaxy, doing the job that needs doing because someone has to do it, and they are who they are. You cannot kill an idea with a Blackstone fortress. You cannot destroy a people by destroying the planet they came from. The Cadian Shock Troops are still fighting, and they will keep fighting until the last of them falls. And after that, they will fight in the memory of every soldier who knew them, who trained beside them, who watched them hold a line that should not have held. That is what Cadia is. That is what Cadia means. That is the last light of Cadia, and no darkness in the galaxy is thick enough to put out. Part 26. The Weight of 10,000 Years. I want to talk about something that soldiers on long campaigns rarely discuss, because the culture of service does not have good language for it, and because admitting it feels like weakness even when it is not. I want to talk about the weight of history. When you serve in the Astra Militarum, you are not just a person carrying a lost gun through a combat zone. You are a link in a chain that stretches back 10,000 years. The Cadian Shock Troops, the regiment I was born to, the regiment that made me, have a lineage that predates the current calendar. There were soldiers defending that choke point before the Imperium had its current name, before the Space Marines were organized into chapters rather than legions, before the Horus Heresy, before the Great Crusade, before the Emperor walked openly among his people. There were human beings standing between the Eye of Terror and the inhabited worlds of the galaxy and saying, no, we will not move. This line holds. The weight of that is not metaphorical. You feel it physically, the way you feel the weight of your kit on a long march. It is not crushing. You are conditioned for it, bred for it in a sense. But it is there, the awareness that you are not the first, that countless people have stood exactly where you're standing and made exactly the choice you're making, and that most of them are dead, and that the specific position you occupy is the same position that was occupied by someone who is dead, who was occupied by someone who is dead before that, going back and back and back through centuries and millennia. There's comfort in that, oddly. The knowledge that this position has been held before, that the people who held it did not fail even when everything argued for failure, that the tradition you're a part of is older than most institutions in the Imperium and has a track record of choosing the hard thing. There is comfort in being part of something that has been doing this for 10,000 years, in knowing that the question of whether it can be done has been answered repeatedly in the affirmative by people who had no better resources than you do. But there is also weight, the weight of all those deaths, the weight of all those held lines, the weight of the accumulated sacrifice of 10,000 years of soldiers who gave everything they had to a piece of ground that has now, finally, come apart beneath them. They held it. They held it for 10,000 years. And in the end, it was not enough, not because they failed, but because the forces arrayed against them were finally, after 10,000 years, large and organized and absolutely committed enough that nothing human could have stopped them. Does that retroactively diminish what they did? Does the fact that Cadia eventually fell make the 10,000 years of holding it meaningless? I have thought about this more than I can count. I have arrived at an answer that satisfies me, though I am aware it may not satisfy everyone. No, it does not. The holding was the point. The 10,000 years were the point. Every generation that held the line gave the next generation the opportunity to exist. Every soldier who died on Cadia in the service of that defense gave the Imperium another year, another decade, another century of survival. The fall, when it came, was not the negation of everything that preceded it. It was the end of a long, long chapter. And the next chapter, whatever it is, wherever it leads, exists only because the previous one was written. You do not owe the dead success. You owe them continuation. You owe them the willingness to keep doing what they did, to hold the line they held, to be worthy of the tradition they are part of. And you can do that on Cadia or on Gathalammer or on a troop ship in the void or on whatever piece of ground the next campaign drops you on. The specific geography does not matter. The specific planet does not matter. The willingness matters. The refusal to stop matters. That is what 10,000 years of Cadian service has taught me. That is the only theology I have. Part 27. For those who come after. I am writing this, or rather, I am dictating this to a transcription system because my handwriting has been deteriorating for a decade and I do not have the patience to write 30,000 words by hand even if my hand could manage it. for a reason that is not entirely about the present. I am writing it for people who come after, for the soldiers of regiments that do not yet exist, fighting campaigns that have not yet been planned, on worlds that may not currently be inhabited, for people who will look back at this period the way I look back at the early Black Crusades, as history as context, as the events that shaped the world I was born into. I want them to know what it was like from the inside, not what the official records say, not what the propaganda posters show, what it was actually like to be a human being in the 41st and 42nd millennium, doing the work that needed to be done, carrying the weight that needed to be carried, watching the people around you do the same. It was hard. Obviously, it was hard. I do not think I need to make that case at greater length. I think the preceding narrative has established it adequately. But it was also, and this is the thing I want the future to understand, it was also meaningful, not in a comforting, redemptive narrative way, not in a way that explains away the suffering or the loss or the waste of it. Meaningful in the specific, concrete, non-metaphorical sense that the things we did had effects, that Cadia holding for 10,000 years had effects, that the activation of the pylons had effects, that Creed making the choice he made had effects, that every single soldier who stood on Cadian soil and held their position had effects, even the ones whose names nobody recorded, even the ones who died before they could be noted, even the ones who simply did their job and did not come home. The effects ripple forward. They always do. Every action in this universe sends ripples forward through time, and those ripples interact with other ripples and create new patterns, and some of those patterns are catastrophes, and some of them are something better than catastrophes, and you cannot always tell in the moment what you are contributing to, but you are always contributing to something. The choice to hold or not hold, to fight or not fight, to show up or not show up, these choices matter. They accumulate. They build toward futures that would not exist without them. The Cadian soldiers who held the line mattered. They matter. Their deaths were real losses, and their service was real service, and neither of those facts cancels the other out. They were human beings doing the most important thing human beings can do in a universe that is trying to kill them, which is keep trying anyway. I am still keeping trying. I will keep trying for as long as I can draw a breath and hold a lost gun. And when I cannot, when my thread finally runs out, as all threads do, I hope that the thing I have passed forward, the thing I have contributed to the ongoing chain of people who refuse to let the darkness win, is enough to be useful. That is all any of us can hope for. Be useful. Hold the line. Keep trying. Cadia stands. Part 28. The Final Reckoning. Let me bring all of this together. Let me try to give you the full picture. The Warhammer 40,000 universe is a universe defined by the tension between two things that are both true and that cannot be reconciled, but that must both be held simultaneously. The first truth is that the situation is hopeless. There's no path to clean, final victory. The enemies are real and ancient, and some of them are literal gods. The Imperium is flawed, oppressive, wasteful, cruel in many of its institutional forms, and sustained at enormous human cost. The galaxy is darkening. The Great Rift changes everything about the strategic situation in ways that are not entirely understood and are almost certainly not entirely good. The second truth is that people keep going anyway. That is the other truth that is equally real and equally important. In a universe that does not offer hope in the conventional sense, human beings and post-human beings and beings that are not human at all find reasons to continue, build things, defend things, protect each other, hold lines that are not supposed to hold, activate pylons on dying planets, return after 10,000 years of suspended near-death to lead armies against impossible odds. That tension between the darkness of the universe and the persistent refusal of its inhabitants to surrender to that darkness is the heart of 40k. It is what makes it compelling. It is what makes it not just grimdark for the sake of being grimdark, but something more nuanced and more interesting and ultimately, I would argue, more hopeful than a straightforward heroic narrative. Because in a universe where hope is guaranteed, hope means nothing. It costs nothing and it proves nothing. It is just a feature of the reality you inhabit, like gravity. But in a universe where hope is not guaranteed, where the evidence often argues against it, where choosing to hope is a deliberate act in the face of a reality that does not support it, in that universe, hope is a choice, a courageous one, a meaningful one. Every soldier who has ever stood on Cadia made that choice. Every soldier who is standing somewhere right now on whatever front the current campaign has opened is making that choice. The choice to keep going. The choice to believe, without evidence, that it matters. The choice to be useful in a universe that does not particularly value usefulness and does not offer comfortable assurances that anything you do will make a difference. That choice is the most human thing in the galaxy. More human than architecture or art or music or any of the other things we point to as evidence of our civilized nature. The willingness to keep choosing hope in a universe designed to extinguish it. That is what we are. That is what we have always been. From the first human ancestor who looked at a hostile world and decided to survive it anyway, to the last soldier who will ever stand on a line somewhere in the 42nd millennium and refuse to step back. We are the species that keeps going, even when we probably should not, even when the math does not work out in our favor, even when the gods themselves are against us. We keep going. Cadia falls, and we keep going. The Great Rift opens, and we keep going. The galaxy burns, and the darkness spreads, and the enemies are real and immortal and numerous, and some of them literally eat worlds, and some of them are powered by human emotion, and some of them have been sleeping for 60 million years, and they are waking up now. And we keep going. Because that is what we are. That is the only answer I have. That is the only answer that has ever been available. We keep going. And as long as we keep going, the story is not over. And as long as the story is not over, there is a chance. A slim one. A chance that exists only because we choose to believe in it rather than because the evidence supports it. But a chance. I will take that chance. Every day, every campaign, every morning that is actually morning, and every morning that is just ship lights coming on in a gray corridor on a vessel moving through the void toward the next battle. I take it. Cadia stands. Part 29. Abaddon's perspective. The view from the throne of chaos. I want to do something unusual now. I want to try to look at all of this from Abaddon's perspective because I think it is important, and because I think understanding why the enemy does what the enemy does is the only way to eventually find a way to stop them. Abaddon has been described in imperial records and propaganda as a monster, a madman, a being of pure destruction with no purpose beyond the destruction itself. I want to push back on that characterization, not because I have any sympathy for him. I have precisely zero sympathy for him, but because calling him a monster obscures what he actually is, which is more frightening than a monster. He is a strategist. A patient, brilliant 10,000-year strategist who has pursued a single goal with absolute consistency and has, in the course of 12 failed crusades, built toward that goal with every failure. He is not insane. He is rational, in the way that beings who serve the forces of chaos can be rational, which is to say that his goals are not those of a human being, but his methods of pursuing them are coldly logical. He understands the Imperium better than most Imperials understand it. He has had 10,000 years to study his enemy, and he has used that time. He fell to chaos, or perhaps more accurately, he chose chaos, though the distinction may be finer than it appears, in the aftermath of the Horus Heresy's failure. In the ruins of a dream, he was a man who had given everything to a cause and watched it fail at the last possible moment, not through military defeat, but through the killing of the being who embodied the cause. And in that moment he had a choice, grief and surrender and despair, which would have been the human response, or something else. He chose something else. He chose to take the power that chaos offers, real power, genuine power, the power of the warp translated into physical capability and strategic advantage, and he chose to use it not in service of the chaos god's agendas, but in service of his own. He refused the patronage of any single god. He refused to be their champion, their pawn, their favored warrior. He would serve chaos undivided, the principle of chaos itself rather than any of its particular expressions. And in return, chaos undivided would serve him. This is extraordinary. I do not think I can overstate how extraordinary it is. The chaos gods do not deal on equal terms. They do not make agreements with mortals that actually favor the mortal. Every pact with chaos ends, eventually, in the mortal's corruption and consumption and transformation into something that the god finds more directly useful than a free-willed agent. This is the pattern. This is how it always goes. Abaddon has been doing this for 10,000 years, and he has not been consumed. He has not been transformed into a demon prince or a chaos spawn or a mindless servant of one God's agenda. He remains, in some fashion, recognizably, himself. The first captain of the Luna Wolves, the being who knew Horus, the being who was there at the beginning and is still here now, still pursuing the same goal, still directing the largest military organization in the Chaos Powers arsenal with something that functions like strategic coherence. How? The honest answer is that I do not fully know, and anyone who claims to fully know is probably wrong. The leading theories involve the nature of chaos undivided, the specific way in which all four gods have a collective interest in maintaining Abaddon as a functioning agent rather than consuming him, because his value to them collectively exceeds the value any one of them would gain by corrupting him fully. He is too useful. His 10,000 years of experience, his tactical knowledge, his organizational capacity, his ability to coordinate forces that would otherwise fragment into faction fighting and mutual destruction. These things serve the Chaos Powers' overall agenda in ways that his individual consumption would not. They need him, and being needed by gods is, I suppose, the closest thing to security that a being in his position can achieve. But, and this is the aspect of Abaddon that I think matters most for understanding what comes next, he has spent 10,000 years accumulating not just military power, but something more fundamental. He has accumulated understanding, knowledge of the warp that no human being in the Imperium possesses, knowledge of the Necron artifacts and the old war and the origin of the Eye of Terror that the Imperium has only fragments of, knowledge of the Chaos Gods themselves, their natures, their limits, their areas of disagreement, that he has used to maintain his independence and his usefulness. He is the most dangerous being in the galaxy, more dangerous than any single Chaos God, in the immediate military sense, because the Chaos Gods express themselves through agents and the quality of those agents matters. More dangerous than any single Primarch, because Primarchs are extraordinary warriors, but Abaddon is a 10,000-year strategist with an army that has learned from 12 campaigns. More dangerous, perhaps, than the Emperor himself in the immediate tactical sense, because the Emperor is trapped on a throne and can only act through intermediaries while Abaddon is free. Understanding that is not admiring it. I do not admire Abaddon. I despise everything he represents and everything he has done and everything he has taken from me and from the billions of others who lost everything to his wars. But despising an enemy is not the same as understanding them, and understanding them is the prerequisite for stopping them. The Indomitus Crusade bought time. Time is valuable, but Abaddon is patient. He will use the time too. He will assess what worked and what did not in the 13th Black Crusade. He will account for Guilliman. He will account for the possibility that more Primarchs might return. He will develop new approaches, new weapons, new allies and resources and strategies that address the changed reality of a post-Cadia galaxy. He is planning, right now. Whatever he is, wherever the demon-touched consciousness of the Warmaster of Chaos currently resides, it is planning, and we need to be ready. Part 30. The last words of a Cadian soldier. I have been talking for a long time, longer than I planned. That is the nature of stories. They have their own sense of where they need to go, and the person telling them is not always the one in charge. Let me end where I began, with a moment, with a single human being's experience of a very large event, because that is the only way any of us can really approach something this vast. We are not historians. We are not gods. We are people in the middle of things, doing our best to understand what we are part of and what it means and what we are supposed to do next. I am Sergeant Aldrich Vane. I was born on Cadia. I was raised in the tradition of the shock troops. I learned to fight before I learned to read, and I have been fighting ever since. And I expect I'll be fighting until the job is done, or I am not capable of fighting anymore. Whichever comes first. I have lost my world and my commanding officer and more comrades than I can count, and I have found in the aftermath of all that loss that I am still functional, still useful, still here. That surprises me sometimes. I would not have predicted it. On the day the world cracked beneath me and the sky went wrong and I pushed 31 soldiers onto a transport that might or might not make it through the closing window of an evacuation that was happening faster than anyone had planned for. I would not have predicted in that moment that I would be here, functional, talking, planning the next campaign. But I am. And the only reason that makes sense to me when I try to articulate it, is that I was made by a world that did not produce people who stop, that trained me from before I was old enough to understand what training was, To get up when knocked down and continue when continuation seems impossible, and hold the line when the line seems hopeless. Cadia did not produce optimists. It produced survivors, people who do not require the situation to be good in order to do what needs to be done. People who can look at the very worst of circumstances, a planet dying, a war lost, a galaxy wounded, and reach the same conclusion they always reach. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Cadia is gone. Cadia stands. Both of those things are true. I will hold both of them, without resolving the tension between them, because the tension is the truth. The loss is real and the continuation is also real, and I carry both of them the same way I carry my kit. Not because it is light, but because it is mine. The galaxy burns. We burn with it, or we hold what we can hold, or we reach into the fire and pull out something worth saving. That is the choice. That has always been the choice. I know which one I make. I am Cadian. The line holds. The light endures. And whatever comes next, whatever Abaddon is planning, whatever the chaos gods want, whatever the great rift has unleashed, whatever threats are waking in their ancient tombs or descending from between the stars, we will face it. We always do. Cadia stands.